Hanji, can you hear me now, Ji?
Yeah, I can hear you. Zishan, can you say something?
Good morning.
Good morning. You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Dr. Murtaza, Mustafa, are you there, sir? What's happening here?
You don't ever press, you don't need this. More, you don't need. Like two in Korean. Saravana.
Yeah, admitting, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Gurnamji, can you hear me? And you say something so I know we can hear you.
He doesn't have his.
Good
He's
now.
connecting to the audio. He's finding it hard, probably.
Good morning, Graham.
Morning,
Morning. Very smart.
occasionally. We're getting a few people joining us.
That's all right. We'll give a few minutes.
Yes, we're fine for now.
Yeah.
And obviously, everyone should have the agenda. As we said, that we all go on mute in due course when we start.
Yeah.
And obviously, if some people are speaking, it may be later on. So we won't be worried too much if people join later, as long as the speakers are on.
Okay. Suddenly come back. He hasn't got a speaker.
He's gone. Oh no, he's there.
Can you unmute him?
Just press that. Ask me.
Where is it going?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Nazar, my name is Nazar Lodi. Yes, Gurnamji, welcome and Sat Sri Akal.
It was Dr. Mustafa.
Dr. Mustafa, sorry, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Well, I can't see you either. I mean, I can see, but I can't see myself.
Okay. We can hear you, Dr. Mustafa.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can't does not see themselves?
Good morning, Yvonne.
Yvonne's connecting to the audio. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good morning, doctor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning to you.
We'll
Good morning to
formally
you.
welcome everybody in a minute. Just give a few more minutes.
Thank you.
Because it's Sunday morning, it's very difficult to get every day to go to the bed, but Sunday is even more difficult. Where is Paramjit gone?
Chair, I think you probably have the first at least two speakers in. Maybe we should start.
Give it a few minutes, Graham, please, just a few minutes. Okay, good morning. I request all of you to keep your mic on mute and On the first session, I will request to unmute yourself when you're trying to speak. The agenda we have circulated, I don't think we'll be able to stick to that because Sunday morning, some people have to request on the first session to come and speak. Some of them have to go to Gurdwara, some other commitment. So it may not be strictly as it is. First of all, before we start this conference, very important. This is between World Human Rights Watch and Nation Without State combined conference. And we planned a long time ago what we're going to do in the House of Lord or House of Commons, but unfortunately, as you know, situation wouldn't allow that. I will request 1 minute silence for all those people who give their lives because they were different caste than anybody else, and all those people who were killed because they don't have a state. Can you start now, please? 1 minute silent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I will request barristers. I'm not going to go through everybody's long introduction because the number of people there, if somebody just want to have a brief introduction about themselves, that's fine. I will request now Barrister Zishan Mia to please make his contribution and the effect of the cost in India. Zishan Mia, please, all yours.
Good morning, Assalamu alaikum. I'm very grateful to the host, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lodi, for organizing such an effective and pressing talk on this issue, which has been in debates and discussions in all human rights forums for last 10 centuries. Here we are sitting in 2021 discussing caste system that started from 500 BC. Indian caste system is very much has been very much popular in terms of controversy when it comes to discussions of availability of human rights to very human that are born from the same land, but they are denied their basic rights to exercise, like right to property or expressions, or even access to certain areas within that land, just because they were born in a caste that was not considered to be one of the privileged caste. Uh, the caste system, it's basically originated from by someone who had firm belief in Satanism, and we all know Satanism is the oldest religion of the world, as it is known. And in Satanism, Brahma was considered as God. God as still considered is, and on the basis of the corpus of Brahma, the follower decided to categorize human into 5 different categories, 4 known categories, 5 was implied category, whereby human would perform their daily obligation towards the society, and they will fall in certain category and status in the society by way of contribution. Let's say if we look at the figure of a man, you can see from head to toe, they divided the Burma into 4 parts. The head was considered as Burmese, the top of the head, because the top of the head is on the top part of body. So they from considering it is on the top part of body, they call this caste as Burmese. And because brain functions in terms of think tank for a body, they were so, the Burmese people that fall in this category was given the jobs of priests, lawmakers, and teachers. And then second part was considered from the uh, arms of the Bahamas, and they were given the uh, uh, jobs of warriors. They were to fight, defend, and they were to rule. And then come to the uh, up lower than heart part and the legs, upper leg part. They were called Vishwas, and Vishwa was mostly responsible for to earn bread and butter and trade for the whole society. So all artisans, merchants, tradesmen, and farmers fell into uh, Vishwa's category. And then if we look at the uh, body of Burma, that is the corpus of a man, then the feet was considered as the lower part of the Burmas, and they were called Shudras. And Shudra was given basic low low skill jobs like laboring and etc. They were the fifth implied element as well in this category, which we know in this century is known as Dalits. They were considered untouchable, and they were not allowed access to any of the other category of human, like particularly the top 2 categories. If they were to attend their properties, they would be killed if they would not allow to access to their houses or companies or offices in those days. Now, in beginning, I just quoted from the Quran that we have created men and we have divided into different tribes so they can identify each other. So the basic purpose of the division of human into tribes is undeniable. We are different, but the problem arises where we just uh, decide to restrict the rights for other individuals, considering they are of the less category than we are. If we in early 11th century, when the Mongols were fighting in and approaching the territories which we know as Turkey and Iraq, the people from this area started migrating towards India to save their lives. In those days, this caste system was at its peak, and when Muslims started migrating there, in particular Muslim saints, all these lower caste people, they were very impressed by one ideology, that there was no caste system in the religion. Let me remind you, in early those the days, religion was the deciding factors for people to adopt certain lifestyle. So all the lower caste people like Shudras and Dalits and Vaishyas, they found refuge in converting to different religion. This is why the there were many followers of all these saints, Muslim saints, that they were migrating to India, and they blindly converted towards Islam to get immunity from the oppression from upper caste Hindus. Now we sitting in UK discussing this caste system, and I don't see we enjoy any glory to criticize the people of previous centuries and people who created this caste system in terms of oppressing the people who fell by birth in lower caste system uh, for the basic reason that uh, British government, not I won't say British government, the colonial system in India just they fuel the caste system. They try to uh, get the uh, upper class people on their side. So they supported caste system by uh, undertaking number of acts. Let's say there was a Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, whereby it was declared that number of people from a particular caste they are born criminal. That defies the basic criminal principle of common law, that you are innocent unless proven guilty. I can understand there are many more things I can say, but my time is nearly up. So I would just conclude by one or two sentences that a caste system is undeniable. You can call it class system or caste system. The problem arises where you try to limit or restrict the rights of people by calling them from a particular class or caste. Uh, if you look at the topic of today, if a person is denied the basic right to property or expression or religion, he won't have a right of self-determination. So this is why in this century you can see we have recently seen the oppression on Kisan protest in India, and if anyone was talking from the West on that protest, they were categorized as a criminal because no one would dare to criticize the law that is made by Burmese in India. This is my conclusion, sir.
May I thank Mr. Zishan, making a very valuable contribution. Now I will request Yvonne Schofield and make a contribution, and I will request the number of people want to make contribution. Very lucky, we've got very highly intellectual people with us. Jagdish just joined us. Welcome, Jagdish. And Yvonne, it's your between 5 to 7 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for inviting me to speak. So just to give a little bit of background, I'm a third-year law student. My interest is in international dispute resolution. I'm from Sri Lanka, so we're aware of the caste system. Again, we're very aware of what the reality on the ground in places like India, Sri Lanka are. There's no denying caste is a real thing and a real issue. However, in 2018 in the UK, caste, it was decided by the British government that caste was not a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. Now, the government concluded its consultation into the question of whether caste should be included as a protected characteristic, much like, for example, sexuality, race. Now, having considered the findings, the government decided not to include caste within the specific legislation, and what they've resorted to is to allow the courts to develop the law around caste through case law. So it's they have decided that rather than a top-down approach to caste, it will be a bottom-up approach. Now, unfortunately, there aren't many, that there just isn't the case law at the moment to develop the ideas around it. The biggest problem seems to be there is a lack of understanding within the, within the courts about exactly what caste is, and this is why they were so reluctant to define it. Now, the key reasons, were considered to be difficulty in defining caste in legislation, and if you can't define it in the law, it can lead to dangerous precedent. They are aware that caste is quite different to social class, although they are interconnected. And again, social class is not something that they are looking to protect as a protected characteristic. Now, obviously, the matter has deeply divided the Indian community in the UK. But although it won't be a specific characteristic, case law does indicate an evolving way forward out of this problem. The courts are still permitted to use the cases before them in developing protections as they deem necessary, especially when it's connected to existing characteristics like ethnicity. So there's one case, I mean, so far before the courts, since while they were in consultation, 3 cases came before the courts. And one of them was particularly interesting. So Turkey and Chandok, if anyone's interested, it's worth reading that case. That's the only case we have on record from which to really make our point in future. Obviously, a lot is going to be left down to the judges. The courts don't believe that enough cases come up yet that warrant, especially in terms of the higher courts, that warrant a greater response from them at this moment. For us, as invested bystanders, it's very important to keep an eye on cases as they emerge, especially if we want to bring this matter back to the government and ask for a top-down solution. Now, just because caste is not a protected characteristic, it doesn't mean that the courts are now will allow negative treatment on the basis of caste, that employers would tolerate it, that or employees should tolerate it. But they do believe that a lot of it can come under the headings of bullying, harassment, etc. Case law, the good thing with case law and relying on case law is it is fluid. It allows for an investigation of specific facts. And from that, it acknowledges cultural and societal changes. And it can give a more nuanced approach rather than a strict definition. So, although there has been a lot of disappointment in the Indian community, all is not lost. It's just a developing area that we need to keep an eye on. Yeah, I think
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said earlier on, I'm going to call another gentleman who have to leave to go to a very important meeting. And Gurpreet Singh, very active political activist in Sikh and Punjab politics. Let me unmute him. Come on.
Oh,
Is he there?
what's the name?
Gurpreet, is it?
ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਅਸਲਾਮ ਅਲੈਕਮ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
It's all yours, and I'm going to request you to slightly cost and what is happening at the moment in India and the whole, how the people are suffering and what you do about it. And you only got a 5 minutes. I know you cut your other business short. You need 5 hours, but not today.
Right, okay. Hi, my name is Gurpreet Singh. I'm from an organization called Saving Punjab, amongst other organizations such as the World Sikh Parliament. I just want to start off by saying congratulations to Lodi Saab and the organizers of this event. As in, at these difficult times, you're still, finding your best opportunities to raise these issues about human rights. Just to kind of quickly talk about what Mia Saab said earlier, and Yvonne, in terms of the caste system itself, it originates, a long time ago, but in today's day and age, the caste system is totally irrelevant, especially in terms of what is going on in the world and how equal opportunities and everything. Just to kind of give you a quick understanding of what the caste system was in a very simplified version. The Brahmins said only they could worship, so they didn't let anyone worship. They only taught their lineage the Sanskriti. When they needed protection, they then gave the second factor or the second level to the Rajputs and the Kshatris, which were the warriors, because they needed protecting. But even the Rajputs and the Kshatris couldn't worship. The third level was the Vaishnus. The Vaishnus were basically anybody that was a working class person. That was anyone that was a farmer, a leather worker, a carpenter, fell into this third band, and they would pay taxes to the actual Brahmins at the top. And then there was the low caste, which can be broken down into two sections. One, Shudra, and now we call them Dalits. And that whole system itself was, challenged by the Sikh first Guru Nanak, and by other religions such as Muhammad. And given two examples of that, from one example from the Sikh faith, the first word in Gurbani in the holy Guru Granth Sahib is one, and there is nothing but one, and that is the kind of start and end, that there is only one God and there is nothing else. There's nothing one. There is nothing other than one. So that makes us all equal. Also in Gurbani, it quotes Aval Allah Noor Upaya Kudrat ke sab bande ek noor to sab jag bhuja kaun pule ko mande. That everybody, it has the same light. Sab mein jot hai soye tis mein chanan sab mein chanan. That light shines upon everyone equally, and everyone has that light within them, whether they're male, female, whatever caste, they're all equal. And similarly in Islam, the first call to prayer that was made by a person called Bilal. And Bilal was a non-Arab. And in that time, Arabs gave themselves a status which was higher than non-Arabs. And the Quran specifically stated that an Arab has no rights over a non-Arab, and a non-Arab has no rights over an Arab, which basically abolished all inequalities. It says everyone is equal. In Islam, everybody, when they go to Hajj, wears the same clothes. Why? To show equality and purity throughout. Today's day and age, that same system that was challenged thousands of years ago and hundreds of years ago is still being pushed across many platforms. Even in some villages today in India, a Shudra has no rights. Someone from a higher caste of a Rajput and a Kshatri can go rape a Shudra woman, and the Shudra woman can't do anything about it unless there's 3 witnesses to that rape. There's so many ways in which it needs challenging at the highest levels, even in the United Nations, of how this system of inequality, telling someone when they're born that they can't live past this social status that they were born into, is very, very backward thinking. And I, honor that Lodi Sahib and the organizers of this call have even, chose this as a topic, because it challenges that very system that we're talking about now. In India, the farming issue is, again, the farmer comes into that third category of Vaishnu, which is working class people. And the Brahmins at the top are still choosing the laws. They are still showing that they have the authority. And it is the whole system starts off from that who are the farmers to come in and say to us they don't want these laws. And this protest has been going on, the world's biggest protest, they're calling it. And it's been going on for the last 5-6 months, where they've gone and they've set up shop in Delhi. Why? Because they're challenging that system, the system that has basically told them that they don't have rights. And I think as people are, advancing in terms of their social understanding, this system will carry on being challenged because everybody in the world has equal rights. No one has any more rights than anyone else. And we should all understand that and believe that and keep challenging this system of caste. And coming on to the kind of second topic of this, which is self-determination, it comes into that. Because if someone has their own rights, and the only reason people would want to self-determine where they're living is if they don't have their rights. And they would allow, I'll give an example in India. The Kashmiris would like their self-determination. People of Punjab would like their self-determination. Assam, the Seven Sister States, Tamil Nadu. There's so many of these United States of India, where these many states were first free before the British invaded. They were sovereign, they ruled once, and that rule was taken away from them and given to a central government, which gave, I always ask the question is, and I can only speak from Punjab's behalf, because I've done research on Punjab's behalf, how did Punjab benefit from becoming the United States of India? I can't think of one single thing how Punjab has benefited. Our water was looted. 75% of our water, the land of 5 rivers is now the land of 1.5 rivers, 2 rivers, and is on the verge of becoming a desert. If anybody would like to find any more information about what's going on in Punjab and in India, you can follow on Saving Punjab, or you can go onto our website, which is savingpunjab.org, and it gives further details. I am a bit wary of time because I know Ludhi said 5 to 7 minutes, so I'm going to finish there. But I would like to just open that question for future people that are coming to talk. How has these states benefited from becoming the United States of India? How are they benefiting at the moment when their laws and their rights are still being stripped away? Thank you once again to the organizers, and much appreciated.
Thank you very much. I know because I contacted you, everybody saying, Lodi, it was a collective effort, Graham. A lot of work been done behind the scene, and he is the gentleman aspire me. And those of you know, I've been there for a very, very long time. That's what we do. Somebody have to take up, and it is not possible without people like you encouraging us to carry on doing what we're doing. Without you and few others, because we are very few this time, we could get loads of people, but it is recorded and it will be circulated widely. Now I'm very lucky. We got another gentleman here today. It wasn't on the agenda. Mr. Mustafa is an international gentleman, understands a lot of international rules and regulations, and he need about 12 hours to speak. But I said to him today, he can't speak for 12 hours. He can't speak for 12 minutes. So we cut it in half. So we divided 12 in 2, so he only got 6 minutes to speak. And I'm sorry, Dr. Saab, you got 6 minutes, start now. And I'm watching the watch.
Thank you very much. I will restrict my delivery to thanking you under 3 headings. Out of respect for all those who attended and to your encouragement, I want to thank you because you brought up a very important subject to our attention. And secondly, very relevant matter. And thirdly, a very dangerous matter. Therefore, I thank you wholeheartedly. I will not rush through history of mankind, no less than 60,000 years. I will only focus on a minor area which my learned friend most eloquently followed from the 11th century onwards. I will not refer to this subject matter as caste system and self-determination. I will not demean us. I will simply refer it as a subject of our conversation. The subject of our conversation has to be understood under several disciplines. One, history, the other, politics, and the other, ethics. This is not a patronizing attitude from a retired academic and a lawyer, but a fact. It is very important, I said, and I thank you for it, because it's immoral and it is unlawful. It is regardless who declares it immoral, under what scripture, and it is unlawful regardless which court sits on judgment. Therefore, history, the First World War history, proved that people die for it. The Second World War history proved that people died again for it. And the Cold War was drawn out because people were prepared and died for it. And by the way, since we started this conversation, at least 16,000 people died and nearly 4,000 children died. Therefore, more people died since the wars came to an end at the time of peace. Therefore, it's a very dangerous. So I thank you because it's very relevant, because it keeps popping up under variety of headings like division of labor, under economic, political, social history, under rights to be represented because you hold on to certain amount of property, under Reform Act of 1830 Parliament. You could imagine constituencies being drawn on the basis of inheritance. I will not go into anything other than simply call it a subject matter under review. With regards to certain intelligentsia in certain academia, I noted with great distress an argument only very recently that the subject matter is irrelevant because there is no international law. That's hardly truthful, and that's hardly suitable for an academic to argue. Therefore, I will simply point out that international order is formal. In other words, 192 states agreed to form an association. It's called United Nations. It existed as League of Nations. Therefore, it is formal political system with members formally accepting the rules and norms and regulations. To turn back and compare this international order with domestic jurisdiction and simply to argue there is no clarified, defined meaning for a certain terminology or subject matter, therefore I will not rule on it, is completely contrary to historical reality of the First World War, of the Second World War, of the Cold War, and the current wars that we are going through. Therefore, don't pay attention. It is a very dangerous area of subject matter, and people who are politicians should be very, very aware of it, who are professionals should be very sensitive of it, and who are academic should be very, very humbled by the persistence of this subject. I think I have overstated my case, so I thank you for bringing up something very important to our attention. I thank you for bringing something very relevant to our lives. I thank you for something very, very dangerous we need to be aware, sensitive, and conscious of. And I hope I haven't bored every one of you. Thank you very much.
No, you haven't bored us, enlightened us. And I think we need more time. Sooner the things get better, we'll have a meeting where we'll only have a 1 or 2 or 3 speakers with the audience, where they'll have a delivery of the lecture and then answer and question. Actually, we want to do, but we can do it some other time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Can I request now? Let me unmute him first. Can you come and unmute that? Jagdish ji, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself, please? Jagdish?
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. It's all
Okay.
yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm speaking on the subject of strategies to combat the practice in India and UK
Yes, sir.
in relation to caste. Right, very quickly and very rapidly, strategies to combat this horrible social and political disease. Some things I would make the point very briefly that some things like conquering nations, subjugating nations, imposing laws on nations is largely a political disease. With caste, this is both a political and social disease, and it occurs very thoroughly and very evidently from bottom up, and top down and bottom up. First and foremost, it devastates our very human dignity and human rights. So in terms of combating this disease, we need both a human-based response, and we equally need a political response. And in terms of some of the strategies, there's many strategies, so we don't have time for all of those, but I'll mention just a few that are available that we can do as communities and we can do as peoples. First and foremost, we as struggling peoples, wherever we are, in the UK and in India, we need to create a united voice against caste, this whole horror story of caste. Sadly, there hasn't been that unified response. Sikh organizations have failed. Organizations across South Asia have failed. Caste is a phenomena that continues in Pakistan, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal. The only people who seem to be making any noise about caste are, unfortunately, like with most cases, most situations, the victims, the victim community, the Dalits. The lack of response from across the board is quite visible, and that certainly needs to change. If we're going to engage with the Dalit community and build confidence and build bridges with the Dalit community, then certainly we, the communities, the diverse communities, need to show that we stand with you, you the Dalits. We stand with you as the victims. And until that's done, I think we've got a lot of blockage within our struggles, because our struggles are not perfect by any means. Our struggles are right, they're purposeful, but they're not perfect in terms of the strategies we're operating. So that is a first challenge. Secondly, if we're going to utilize and share our political strengths in terms of electoral power, both in India and in the UK, then it's a case of all the communities, the Kashmiri, the Punjabi, the Sikh, the Tamils, we all uniting together as one united electoral force. And this has been something that the National Liberal Party, we Nations Without States, have been promoting and talking about, but unfortunately, it's not made any great headway. Now, in terms of that electoral force, we also need to include the Dalits. And until, again, it comes back to that basic question, until the Dalits feel engaged with us, and until they feel that we are serious about them, they're not going to engage with us. And this is a battle and an argument that has been constantly circulating in discussions I've been having with Sikhs, with Dalits, with everybody involved. The Dalits say, we don't trust you, basically. You don't stand for us. When the issues for us come up, you're not there. So, you know, we don't have that trust. We feel alienated from you, and we're not prepared to dip our toe in the water with you. Try and speak to the Sikhs. How do we engage with them? How do we reform ourselves? How do we demonstrate and build trust with them? The Sikhs are saying, well, we're not doing anything wrong. We're perfectly good. The farmers' protest, for example, in Punjabi farming, sadly, the caste system is very rife. And I'm going to get criticized for this by fellow Punjabi people, because you shouldn't be saying this. But in the farming industry of Punjab, we the Punjabi farmers, we use low caste laborers because they're cheap and because they're easy to exploit. And the sad tragedy that in the land of Guru Nanak, this is going on. In the land of Guru Nanak, this is going on. And this is a devastating reality that we haven't managed to resolve yet. There's a big social struggle that we need to go through. And through that social struggle, we need to go through the political struggle to build unity, build confidence, build trust with fellow members of our Punjabi nation and Punjabi community who feel fragmented from us, who feel alienated from us, and engage them in a common cause, which is ultimately the cause of the Punjabi national self-determination and Punjabi national liberation. But we've got those internal failures. We've got those internal failures, and it takes a very brave person to acknowledge the failures, and an even more brave person to then start to deal with those failures. The Tamils have got those failures. There's no doubt, they're denying it. There's failures in all movements and all nations. Kashmiris have got failures. The Palestinians have got failures. And so many more movements. There is just as much as we fight this external struggle, it's equally important that we fight the internal struggles as well. And we don't pay any attention to that, sadly. And when I often hear voices, Jagdish, you talk about these internal failures, A, they don't exist, and secondly, all you're doing is fragmenting and disuniting the movement. So there is a resistance to dealing with these internal failures. Now, in terms of the strategies, I focus again, until we build trust and engagement with the Dalit population. The Dalits represent 30% of the East Punjab population, for example. So that out of every 10 Punjabis, 3 people is a Dalit. But they don't feel involved with the Punjabi national cause. They don't feel involved and engaged with freedom struggles, with Punjabi human rights struggles, with Punjabi farmer struggles. On every level, they feel disconnected. And equally in the UK, when we raise issues around India, raise issues around the anti-caste laws in the UK, we've got polarization and fragmentation. Why is it that all the Punjabi Sikh organizations, they're standing at one end of the spectrum and the Dalits are standing at the opposite end? That's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for disunity. It's perfectly the recipe for divide and rule. And that's taking an honest and hard look at it. So on a political level, both in India and in the UK, we are desperately failing. And we need to change that strategy. On a social level, we, the Punjabi community, and I take the Punjabis as a microcosm, as a sample community, and the same things apply to the Tamils, the same things apply to the Kashmiris, and the same things apply to everybody across the South Asian map and beyond. We are, as a Punjabi people, we are fragmented and disunited on caste lines. So somebody from my family who comes from a Jat family will never marry into a Dalit family. And if somebody stupid like me dares to fall in love with someone from a Dalit background, my community will just alienate me or say, look at Jagdish, that stupid guy. He went off and he married a Jamar. His children will be half a mixed breed of Jamar and Jat. That's the nature. That's the nature of grassroots fragmentation in our community. It's institutionalized oppression. It's institutionalized discrimination. And so if we're going to take an honest look at looking at strategies, then they've got to be honest, hard, and direct, both on a political level and a social level. And the same story applies in Pakistan, Punjab, and across Pakistan. Pakistan's not innocent of this, just as India is not innocent of this. So I'll finish there, and I'll simply say we need to take a very hard and sincere look within ourselves. And when we start to make the change within ourselves, the change on the outside will start to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you very much. A very good contribution, very honest contribution, very, very close to the reality. I endorse every word you said. I shouldn't be making any comment, but I feel excited what you just said. We have to clean our own house first. That's the only thing I will say. Thank you. Very good contribution. I hope there will be some time on the end where you can have some answering questions. Can I request now Gurnam Singh ji to...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir. We can make some contribution.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fascism.
Thank you very much, Nazar Saab, and thank you to everybody for your contributions. And Jagdish Singh for his deep honesty. I always feel that Jagdish Singh makes us think about our own consciousness as well. My connection's a bit unstable, so please let me know if I don't come across that clearly. Yeah. So my topic is Hindutva fascism, and I'm not going to cover the ground on caste because that's already been covered. And the whole point is that the Hindutva project itself is seeking to recast, as it were, caste. It's seeking to re-entrench caste ideology. So, there's an obvious connection there. But India is often hailed as the world's largest democracy, but increasingly the authoritarian actions of the BJP government in recent years culminating all kinds of violence and intimidation, particularly to Indian farmers, but also to people of, so-called low class Muslims, other minorities. It's really raising some concerns about the rise of fascism in India, and I just want to explore some of these things. So for a complex set of reasons, humanity has reached a point where any consensus about what constitutes reality or truth is being seriously undermined in what is characterized as the world. If this is indeed the case, then we all need to heed the arguments and the thoughts of the Holocaust historian Timothy Snyder, who in a book called On Tyranny in 2019 argues post-truth is pre-fascism. And what he's saying is that the abandonment of facts can lead to the abandonment of freedom. And most importantly, this state of affairs can lead us down a slippery slope towards fascism. And Snyder observes that you submit to tyranny when you renounce the difference between what you want to hear and what actually is the case. In a previous period, though, coming from at this question from a different angle, the philosopher Walter Benjamin, a German philosopher, makes a similar observation. Fascism is to organize the poor masses and address their grievances without any real change to their material circumstances. In other words, what Benjamin is saying is, he says that what fascism does, it seeks its salvation in giving these masses not their rights, but instead a chance to express themselves, and this kind of anger. And so Benjamin obviously was reflecting on Hitler's rise to power in the 30s, which he witnessed firsthand. But these observations that fascism both feeds off the aesthetics of discontent, just kind of raw anger, as it were. He was pointing out that fascists are not really interested in improving people's lives at all. They are simply interested in building solidarity through fomenting resentment. And you can see that really with the BJP and the RSS and how they're trying to foment this resentment. And of course, the same kind of stuff with Donald Trump and other, authoritarian leaders that across the world now. And they're trading a post-truth ethic to comfort and ultimately deceive the victims of oppression. That's what happens. If we look at Modi today, Modi is feted as this great statesman, leader of the world's fifth largest economy and the world's largest democracy. But if you look at his recent history, it's a completely different, picture of this so-called statesman. In 2005, he was banned from entering the US because of his role in the pogroms against Muslims in Gujarat. In 2002, which led to the deaths of 2,500 innocent men, women, and children. And for the same reasons from UK, he had been banned for 10 years between 2002 and 2012. The Modi, Boris Johnson, is hailing great world leader. Emboldened by his landslide victory in the election in 2019, Modi and his BJP government won 353 seats. And he seemed to be exuding a kind of confidence and maybe arrogance that was not there in the first term. And this growing assertiveness is manifest in some of his bold and cavalier policies he enacted since his, the Citizens Amendment Act 2019, followed by the revoking of Article 370 and 35A of the Constitution, which annulled the semi-autonomous status of Kashmir. There are other things around this love jihad, which is directly linked to caste and racial violence. But perhaps his best move was in June 2020 under COVID-19 restrictions, the 3 farm ordinances, which led to the real possibility of the whole farming sector being handed over to large-scale corporate corporations. What's called a kind of neoliberalization of the economy. Kind of strange coming together of Hindu fascists and neoliberal corporates. The reason why this is more significant is that whereas the previous moves were targeted against specific minorities, the farming reforms impact over 50% of the population, which cuts against religious, linguistic, regional and caste-based differences. And each of his moves, as well as drawing support from his sycophantic supporters, has also drawn criticism from human activists and intellectuals, journalists and cultural workers. And of course, the Indian state has sought to ban those people, to call them the danger to the state, and using all kinds of colonial legislation, which is very characteristic of fascist kind of regimes. To give you an example of that, and I'm going to wrap up in just 2 minutes. Just last week, this week, there's a Professor Pratap Mehta, who's at the Ashoka University in Haryana, which is a very prestigious university. He's a professor. In fact, he was the vice chancellor. Just last week, he actually resigned. In his letter, he said, my association with the university may be considered a political liability, because he was critical of Modi's anti-democratic move. So he had to resign. And even more ironically, just in solidarity with Professor Mehta, Professor Arvind Subramanian, who's the in fact, he was the chief economics advisor to Modi himself not long ago. He resigned and he said, look, that even Ashoka, with its private citizen backing, can no longer provide a space for academic expression and freedom. And this is very disturbing. So indeed, even challenging the authority of the BJP government is often characterized as being by the pro-Modi media as an act of betrayal, sedition, and they use that sedition law over and over again. 8 journalists were arrested after the 26th of January Red Fort events, purely simply because they were suggesting that there was a government instigated a conspiracy to discredit protests. So just to conclude, is India becoming a fascist state? My answer would be no, but that we should not be complacent. Though all key institutions of a democratic state and basic human rights such as free media, independent judiciary, free elections, freedom of expression, independent and strong trade union movements, and just basic freedoms for women, for minorities, have all been compromised to varying degrees in the last decades, but last few years particularly. I would argue that we're possibly not quite where we were with, say, the genocidal and totalitarian kind of states, typically European fascists in the 1930s. But I am concerned, and I'm particularly concerned the way in which Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are building alliances, both military and economic alliances with India, and also saying that human rights are also being curtailed in the UK as well. And so we are living in very dangerous times. And certainly minorities and Dalits and others, Kashmiris, Punjabis, are very much threatened by these monster states working with multinational monster corporates with the monster social media companies like Facebook. So we are in dangerous times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good contribution. I'm really grateful. There's a one speaker, the young lady, she didn't turn up yet, and I'm not going to ring her. She said she will join us after 11 o'clock with the young kids. And as far as my concern, we completed this session. As the speaker's concerned, everybody turned up except one, that lady, but she did say she'll come after 11 o'clock. And what Graham and myself will discuss that, we'll leave this half an hour because next session will start in 12 or maybe start earlier. It depends, Graham, how you feel it. You can ask questions to each other. There are very few of us here. All of us were supposed to be anyway. And how has anybody got any question before I ask them? Graham, question, please. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just, because obviously we haven't got all day, I noticed the, Yvonne mentioned about case law. There is one case law where decided that a case of in that tribunal was regarded as motivated by caste. And there was the servant, shall we say, the employee was badly treated on the basis of caste. But of course, in law, it's not a protected characteristic. So it's possible for a judge in a tribunal to accept that somebody's motivation to badly treat somebody is based on caste. That's just an observation on that. I want to come back to quickly to Jagdish. Maybe he can answer this, or anybody else for that matter, concerning trust. Because we have, on a low level, tried to reach out to Dalits, and we don't seem to be very successful. And Jagdish has indicated that there's a lack of trust there. Although I would say that within communities, every type of opinion is represented. So we shouldn't be saying, although we all do it, believe this, Tamils believe that, English believe that. They don't. There's sections within our own communities that do believe in caste or don't mind it, and there's plenty who don't. So we should never brand a whole community as representing one point of view, because it's not true in anything, in fact. But I'd just like to ask, because this is about caste, this session, I'd like to ask Jagdish, and anybody else can jump in, to say, how do we gain trust with Dalits? What do you think we should do? Jagdish.
Thank you, Graham. Very good question. Gaining trust in any struggle, any cause, needless to say, we're all activists. Gaining trust is such a devastatingly important issue. Because without trust, no struggle or cause can get off the ground. And in some sections of the community, there is trust, but then the other sections of the community, there isn't. So we need to, how do we fill that gap? And with the Dalit community, there is clearly a trust issue there. They feel isolated, they feel fragmented, they feel alienated.
Let me know when you finish.
How do we reach out to them? Now, commendably, Graham, you know, I know, and others concerned with the NLP, National Liberal Party, Nations Without States, we know that between us, we have been making active endeavors, as we all know, over the course of the last 10 years. That's been a difficult journey to try and reach into the Dalit community. And to some extent, we have made progress. But that progress is still a low-level progress, in my personal opinion. And it's a progress that needs to be nurtured. And we ultimately need the wider spectrum of our communities to be fully engaged in that. Sadly, that's not being visibly seen. And you make the very fair, valid point that, you know, it's very easy to sort of make declarations and broad brush categorizations that the Punjabi community believes in this, the Kashmiris believe in that, and the Tamils believe in that. Human reality is a lot more complex. And there's shades of opinion, and there's belief systems, and there is an intermixture. There's some common beliefs, and there's sometimes a myriad of beliefs. Sadly, caste, sadly, is one of those horribly common parameters and prejudices that it is, I have to say, and it's little wonder that Hitler admired the Hindu establishment so much, because he admired it because it managed to set up the regimentation of the society of South Asia into such neat and tidy blocks, i.e. the four various caste systems. He admired it because he said that they managed to do it so proficiently, and people were compliant with it. People had been fed this false ideology and indoctrination, and they were just simply throwing themselves into those blocks because they almost felt that's where they belonged.
Can I interrupt? Sorry, very rudely. Our co-chairman Gurcharan Singh just arrived, and he's going to speak for 5 minutes. Caste system in England. Let's look at it. Our co-chairman Gurcharan Singh, 5 minutes.
My mic and thing is off.
Oh, is
Mic. There's no mic there. You can come and sit here.
No, I got the name.
Sorry, the problem with the mic.
That's it. Yeah. No, mic.
Graham, just while they're settling, can I just come in with
carry on. You carry on.
one point? I just want to pick up a point what Jagdish Singh was saying around caste and Hindu ideology. See, one of the problems is, whether it's to do with caste discrimination or race discrimination, is this idea of nature coming back. People keep invoking this idea about nature, natural laws, the natural order. And what you've got in India, Hindutva now, they're saying that there was no caste system in India before the British. This is their narrative. It's really important to note this, that the British came and gave us these labels. We were just naturally happy, like a kind of, I don't know, like a kind of a, say a forest, and you've got different trees in the forest, yeah? We were all happy living together. And the British have come here and then created tensions for us. So stop telling us about a problem of caste. So this is part of the problem, is this invocation of nature. You find Boris Johnson do that with the class system around intelligence. So we really need to challenge this idea about divisions being human nature. They are not human nature. The problem with the Dalits in the UK, and maybe Gurjaran can pick up on this, that they're playing a politics of identity, which sometimes falls into the hands of these very same people, in this kind of group mentality. People like Jagdish and I are saying, I'm a Dalit. We're all Dalits. We're all kind of, come from the soil. But then you said you can't say those things. So this is part of the problem, is we are now at the moment disturbed with politics of identity. The Sikhs are turning on each other, saying you're not a proper Sikh, you're not a proper Sikh. And so, the British, the system's laughing, they're laughing and laughing and laughing at us. Gurcharanji.
Right. Can I? What's this voice again? You want to come here? You want to come here? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Right. Gurcharan. Start it again. Switch it off now. Why always?
So one thing I'd like from today's event is for us to make a statement.
Okay.
That we believe all human beings are equal of worth, of value, of intelligence, and everything else, and that we reject these arbitrary divisions amongst humanity that are part of the problem. I'd like to suggest that today.
We will, what we're going to do, so to cover Gunamji's wonderful suggestion, what we're going to end up that most probably we will have a statement from the group, and it will be issued, the outcome of that. But I'm going to invite Professor Sab later on, but 5 minutes for my co-chairman. Very good looking co-chairman.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and sorry for being late. It was busy yesterday. London organizing the anti-lockdown protest and blocking entire London with all of our supporters. What we have to understand is the caste system is a political ideology. It's a political ideology of enslavement of humanity, and it's a political structure which you can't get out of once it's implemented. And there are efforts being made to institutionalize caste system within UK through various ways. And if you want to talk about the physical form of the caste system, we need to look at the formation of firstly the cabinet, the current cabinet: Priti Patel, Alok Sharma, Rishi Sunak. And now these three people are fundamentally fascist, and they want to overthrow the British way of life and overthrow it with their form of fascist Hindutva ideology. What we have to realize that there have been many attempts to outright ban the caste system within the UK, and this is the lobby, which has stopped it from happening. And now, what we have to realize, what they're trying to do, their justification has been. First, Gurnam made a very interesting point that they said it was the caste system was a British invention, and they were very happy. I think I like to remind all of you that when they said they were very happy, what they were very happy was doing is burning women alive, burning children alive in the name of the caste system, committing child sacrifice regularly in the name of the caste system. Rape was justified under the caste system. Murder was justified under the caste system. There was no, all crimes against humanity were justified under the caste system. So we have to realize, and especially we have to realize that we are not very far off from caste system being politically implemented within UK, because look at the format of not only, well, current cabinet is a example which is there for all of us, but look at the opposition party, Labour Party, or look at the Liberal Democrats, look at all the political entire establishment. Nobody, when you have a system of political slavery and nobody's willing to speak up, it becomes very, very easy to make it as an institution and implement it to the people, because people would be fooled into thinking, oh, this is a new liberal idea. You can frame these ideas if you have political power, because what we have to realize, if we have a situation where all political protests at the moment, which we are seeing is being banned in UK, you are not allowed to do any form of protest, and the laws are being brought in at the moment which outlaw any form of dissent against the government. In that kind of political environment, I think this is the kind of environment these people were waiting for, because they already have this false narrative set up. Because this idea, you see, they want to play this idea of Indian civilization, or the Indian political ideology of the caste system is better than the British way of life. And they want to use that to implement that. And this is becoming a more and more of a dangerous reality, especially being after a lot of high-ranking Conservative Party members backing Sunak as the next Prime Minister. We have to realize Rishi Sunak is a fundamentally fascist. He's been inbred throughout generation to produce an outcome which is, I don't want to really go into what these people really believe in, but what a danger these people represent is they want to overthrow what we have here and overthrow with the fascist of the caste system. And I think we need to realize, take this into account when we are talking about the caste system, because it is a religious compulsion of slavery which they implement, but it's also a political system which they have always used, because India, Dravidian India or the Buddhist India had no caste system. When originally the caste system was brought in by the Aryan fascists, they used the same system to overthrow the Buddhist. And this is being done. Look at Kamala Harris. All of these people, if you look at the infrastructure of at the top levels of politics in the world, there is being an attempt being made to institutionalize global slavery. And I think as Hitler preferred the caste system, I think that at the moment the globalists will love to have a system of slavery like the caste system, which nobody will be able to rebel against. And it would be their religious duty to be part of this system. So therefore, a call on all of you to understand what we are facing today and the reality of caste system in UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Gulshan. Very good, very good contribution. And
Waterman, I've been protesting.
yes, but before Gulshan come in, Dr. Mustafa wanted to make some contribution. Go on, sir.
Yes, I want to refer to Mr. Graham Wilkinson's, sorry, my apologies, Williamson's question with regards to question of trust.
Right.
And before I refer to you, Mr. Williamson's question of trust, I want to refer to everybody's contribution, how we are actually inputting our own analysis of a situation. Now, I want to refer to everybody's contribution and to focus on the figure of a pyramid. If we are looking at a pyramid, whichever direction we are looking at the pyramid, we are looking at the identical problem. And I want to refer to all the contributors to focus on a shapeless shape, and that we are all looking at the shapeless shape from our own point of view. And I also want to all the contributors to focus on the issue of social analysis being distinctive from historical analysis, from psychological analysis, from biological analysis, from genealogical analysis, archaeological analysis. So let's not go into genealogies. Let's focus on the issue. Trust. How do we talk about strategies? How do we talk about trust? Let's talk about trust. Why would I trust anybody? Why would I trust anybody who goes and refers to custom and ancestral behavior pattern? I have no idea what that is. And bang, it's on top of me because I am living in a global village. If I was living 200 years ago and I didn't have any aeroplane, of course I didn't, then I would be quite peaceful, gay as a lark in my own end of the wood. But we are not any longer gay as a lark in our own woods because multinational international corporations, incredible missile systems, they can actually disturb from our spring sleep. So we are living in a very global village. So we need to focus on principles. What is that? How do we trust someone who doesn't want to trust me? There is a law of the land. But the law of the land says there is no specific terminology to protect me. So how can I trust the law of the land? So we go to the next stage. What are the customs? Then we listen to our elders. So at the end of the day, we talk to our eldermen. We talk to our local councillor. Look, we talk to our MP, and we take our chance at the electoral box. So, gentlemen, I am honored to be with you because we are eating the same dish over and over again, and our grandchildren will be watching this and they will be eating the same dish all over again. So I go back to the term trust. Do to me what I will do to you. Then I trust you.
Zishan,
Thank
you
you
want to
very
say
much.
something, please? Zishan.
Yes, thank you very much. Look, we are living in this century when we have evolved ourselves in terms of developing constitutions in our countries, and we have international law in very much codified and formulated form. When I hear my mates who are activists who wants to struggle for human rights and who want to fight for it, and it and I follow the Twitters and all social media, and it is sometimes very uh, painful to watch that and read that people speak like they are living in previous centuries when we don't have any human rights or organized government, so we were living under dictatorships where people won't have freedom of expression, so there were not any courts that will listen to any petition and strike out any government actions on the basis of human rights. There are mechanisms provided in non-international forums and national forums. Uh, let's say even if we are going to give example of India, I am aware how the laws are targeted there if they are to talk about any particular issue that is not liked by majority of governments there. I totally appreciate, understand that. Nevertheless, there is international community standing behind all these fighters for the human rights, and things do not just get limited to territorial jurisdictions in this day of time when we are living in global village. Trust is to be gained by character. Trust is to be gained by honesty in belief and the cause. If we are to have a faith in our cause and we are on the right side of the history, then I believe we need to uh, undertake our efforts and pursue the goal by adopting the mean that is provided by constitutions in every country and under international law. This is my little contribution. It is very fair to say let's go protest on in Parliament Square, or let's do number of protests in any big cities of the world. But what I believe, changes come from within the parliament, not from outside the parliament. And if you want to influence the parliament to legislate the laws to protect rights of any particular community, then you need to have parliamentarians on your side, that is legislatures. And if parliamentarians are refusing to legislate something or not trying to legislate something that contravenes human rights of particular community or trying to discriminate, then you have courts on the sides of people to strike out any law under legislation. There is a We are living in 2021. We're not living in 1919 or 1215 when there was no Magna Carta. We have our human rights and rights codified. This is my little suggestion that if we want to bring change, we need to bring change through following the process that is in place instead of becoming the protesters for that achieve nothing.
Thank you, Zishan. Gurnam ji, हाँ जी, ठीक करो.
Just 1 second, but
Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, I want to follow on from Jishan and Dr. Ahmed. They are both lawyers and they are doing some wonderful work within law. I'm an academic, I do research, teaching. We have to do all those things. But I think, what Gurjaran said, I think, look, democracy has failed. I'm not saying that, I haven't got a better system, but democracy has proven to fail. How is it that in Gujarat, in UP, where you've got Yogi Adityanath, who is an outright violent, psychopathic fascist, unapologetic, can get a huge majority in the largest Muslim state in India? How is it, yeah? How is it that the Conservatives can have a landslide victory? How is it Trump can become the president of the US? See, the problem is democratic systems have reached their zenith in a world of global neoliberal corporate, these social media companies. So what we have to do is we have to develop a new politics of struggle, of direct action, but we also have to do the kind of work that people like yourselves are doing in the law, in the nooks and crannies. So it's not one or the other. And we have to find ways of building solidarity with musicians, with IT workers, with lawyers, with human rights activists, and with those people who are feeding langar on the borders of Delhi. For me, those people are the revolutions because they make revolutions possible. It's okay, we can go to Downing Street and we should do, and we should camp out there. But who's going to provide the kind of supplies to keep us going? So we have to work together. It seems to me that's the key thing. And this system fragments us. I mean, even this bloody census that we're doing at the moment, it's getting our people turning on each other. How mad can it be?
Thank you very much. Jagdish, quick one, and then Graham Williamson, and then Professor, and then I'll be the last one. Right,
Fine.
Jagdish,
I'm not going to say too much. Very quickly, Baji Shishan has indicated that we should work within the set systems of the 21st century or the current world. And yes, certainly wonderful. It would be wonderful, Baji Shishan, that if in Pakistan we had the same system as Britain, in India we had the same system as Britain, because Britain does have a very good system compared to the rest of the world. And as much as it's imperfect, it is a very good system. Despite all the, and I won't go into a rhetoric about the constitutions and the legals and the whatnot, the reality of India and Pakistan, the reality of Egypt, the reality of 2/3 of the world, despite having superficial laws and parliamentary systems, we all know that there isn't a culture of law and order and compliance and playing by the rules in all of these different parts of the world. Therefore, breaking the law, suppressing vulnerable peoples and communities is quite easy. It's done easily. Governments can commit genocide and so forth. What legal redress do we have? The Tamils are banging on about, quite rightly so, about the 2019 genocide. Who's going to give them justice? Who's going to give Punjab justice for 1984? Nobody. It's not going to happen. So when the law is ineffective, and at times when the law becomes the enemy of the people, the law sanctions mass killings and extrajudicial killings and so forth, then the law renders itself anti-people, anti-democratic. And I'm not trying to just say this as a spiel, but we need to maintain a healthy balance. And I see the predicament of law, because I practice law in this country, as Graham knows, and yet I make quite radical statements alongside that. I could easily get struck off. For example, if I made a devastating statement about law, that it's bad law or ineffective law and so forth. But the law has its place, but it's only positive when it's truly and in spirit and in letter if it's enforced properly. And unfortunately, we don't see that in other parts of the world. And that's the problem we've got.
thank you.
How we move on, how do we...
Just 1 second.
That remains
Let's Zishan answer that.
No, I'm not answering. I'm quoting Mr. Jagdish. If you're not talking against law, you're not a lawyer. We need to develop law. The whole purpose of discussion is we need to find the weaknesses and develop those weaknesses and leave better law for next generation, as the our ancestor left this law to us.
Thanks God, there are some of us not lawyers this morning. Can I ask Graham, you want to make contribution? Then I'll ask Dr. Murtaza. Graham?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick because we've got 3 minutes to go and then we have to have a break before we start again on self-determination this afternoon. My only point is I guess I'm the outsider here in this particular discussion. Obviously, I don't have any Asian background, obviously. Therefore, I've never come across caste before, other than intellectually and historically reading about it. I've never experienced it myself. And it's obviously quite unique in some ways, as Durham says himself, that the debate, who had it first, who gave it, who took it. The reality is, if caste was openly practiced in Britain, it wouldn't last 5 minutes. If it was admitted as such. We've had caste, it's called the class system in the past, and people never had the opportunity to rise above their glass ceiling. Generally now, whatever people say, we are in a far better state now than we were many, many years ago. So somebody from the so-called lower class, working class, can go right to the top. It is possible. There is equality of opportunity, even though there's not actual equality. Compare that clearly to India, where that's not the case. And we see in the media many examples of caste caste victims, Dalits being murdered or raped, etc. Well, there's lots of murder and rape all over the world. The difference is, it seems in India is that somehow it kind of justifies it if it was a Dalit was the victim. It kind of, you can maybe escape the consequences of your actions if you were a Dalit victim. Whereas in Britain, generally say that wouldn't be the case. A victim is a victim. And it's something that needs to be resolved. And whilst India it's got its own dynamic, and what can we do about India? We can't really, only the Indians needs to resolve their issues. It may be a global village, but obviously they still have that territorial integrity. That's probably right, actually, and Indians need to rise up and deal with it. But certainly we shouldn't allow that sort of thinking to fester in Britain. And that's why I'm disappointed that the Equalities Act hasn't been enacted properly, when in fact the caste was meant to be and written in the Act. And all it needs is the second place, despite all the different difficulties of proving it. But it's the same with race and sex and gender and all the other protected characteristics. It's always difficult to prove that was your motive. So I will support the Equalities Act being enacted properly, and caste should be in it, even if it's only small. It sends the right message. Thank you, Chair. I'll say no more because we're running out of time. Thank you.
Yes, can I say last one, because somebody requested, Dr. Murtaza, you are the last speaker for this session. And as my co-chairman said, we finished this session 11:30. If anybody wants to go on lunch or whatever they want to do it. If you want to stay on screen, it's up to you. Then next session will start 12 o'clock, which is self-determination. My co-chairman, Graham Williamson, will be sharing that, and the number of very, very good speakers. Dr. Murtaza, you are the last speaker for this session. Hello.
I will be exceptionally brief in the hope to continue with self-determination later. With regards to law is not a magic. We are all lawyers. Literally, adult education demands everyone to be lawyers, sociologically oriented, hypothetically speaking, common law oriented, whatever. At the end of the day, law is a tool. Could be abused, and it has been abused, or it can be used. So I thank you very much for letting me to be the last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's up to you what you want me to do. We can leave there, but I think we all need a cup of tea. I want to do. We'll rejoin 12 o'clock. Please join us. And if you want to stay, what to suggest, Graham?
Just want to say it's been a fantastic start. It's been a brilliant start. So
Thank you very much,
looking
sir.
forward to the next session. I think we should have a break. I think we'll be energized then for the next session.
Okay. So what do you want me to do? Switch it off or just leave it?
Could I suggest you should probably stop recording and start back at 12. We'll meet back at 12.
That's
and
fine.
If it stays on, make sure you're muted. We'll stop the recording. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you all 12 o'clock.
Thank you.
Go and have a nice dinner. Stop cutting.
You did a second.
You do it here? Mute everything.
Put yourself on mute, Nazar, because it's recording now. Thank you, everybody.
It's recording now.
Thank you. Right, we're going to start dead on time, rather unusual, is it not? With our second session of today, which is on self-determination, but specifically within India. Now, I'm chairman of the Self-Determinist Pressure Group Nations Without States, obviously having a great interest in this topic. I'm co-hosting this conference today with the other organisation, World Human Rights Watch, who hosted and chaired the first session on caste in India. I'm going to do a short presentation called India and Empire, and then I'll invite other speakers in the order of the agenda as we go. Thank you. So, although the country is known as the Republic of India, in many respects it might be better described as an imperial state. As we approach the 74th anniversary of independence, for most Britons, India is the largest democracy in the world, populated by Indians sharing a common language in Hindi, but understanding English as a second language, worshipping the god Shiva, whilst living in unease, perhaps, with their largely Muslim neighbour in Pakistan. The reality, however, is somewhat different. Apart from being the home of two major linguistic families, the Indo-Aryan and the Dravidian, over 21 official languages and over 1,500 dialects, India contains within its borders numerous ethnic and culturally distinct groups. Sikhs in the Punjab, hill tribes in the northeast, autonomists in Telangana or Rayalaseema, and of course, Kashmiris and other estranged Muslim factions dotted around the continent. All combined to paint a picture of a divided country, camouflaged by an external vision of unity offered to the world. Certainly the central government feared for the unity of India and has often used sedition laws to gag so-called anti-national activities of speech. Superficially, this is hardly surprising, since India was the creation of another empire, the British, who had no regard for existing kingdoms or borders and carved out as much territory as it could and simply added to their African or Asian assets. Thus, as with most colonial empires, resulting borders cut across tribes, linguistic groups, or absorbed smaller nationalities. In their haste to leave, most colonial powers simply handed over the control to the bureaucracy they had set up to help administer their possessions. India was different in one respect, however, in that ultimately the Muslim states of Pakistan and East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, broke away before independence was granted. Yet even after Britain departed, they left behind over 500 princely states, ranging from tiny fiefdoms to gigantic Cinderella states like Hyderabad, for the Indian government to absorb by fair means or foul. Yet in many respects, in the eyes of the world, most of India seems to get on. Most separatist movements are largely dormant, although most were often brutally suppressed, as in the Punjab in 1984, or being satisfied by autonomy, such as the Mizoram, or by language recognitions. Of course, farmers' protests of late is tinged with separatist sentiment, but it's not recognised as such by the world, and in fact the media have basically airbrushed out Sikhs' involvement or leading of that protest. I don't think that's an accident. One reason, of course, is that the diverse cultural invasions over the centuries, for example, the Aryans, the Sakas, the Huns, the Pathans, the Mughals, and finally the Europeans, were through a process of assimilation and amalgamation absorbed within India, and very few peoples became rooted within a distinct territory. When the Soviet Empire, for example, fell, it fragmented into constituent parts: Ukraine, Kazakhstan, the Baltic or Caucasus states. When the British Empire fell, there was no obvious territorial distinctions beyond those in the Far East and West between the peoples in India, nor in most cases religious or cultural differences. The economic miracle of the 1990s moved much of the dissatisfaction that radical movements rely upon. A rising GDP and a reduction in poverty, very relative of course, reduced the link between the poor and revolutionary politics, where the separatists are ideological, and made the prosperous Indian states reliant upon the purchasing power of the citizens of the others. Yet the uprising in support of Sri Lankan Tamils in Tamil Nadu, post-2009, brought this into question whether India was serving the interests of its constituents' peoples, in this case Tamils, or instead some bureaucratic geopolitical game at the centre. The old Dravidian separatism of the 50s and 60s received a new lease of life, with some intellectuals and students mulling whether loyalty to the concept of India was only one way. Should the economy stagnate in the future, we might see the idea of a separate autonomous Tamil Nadu or elsewhere once again become a serious force. The reignited conflict in Kashmir following India's revocation of Article 370, which guaranteed its autonomy, has boosted outstanding calls for independence. Most topically, as I mentioned before, is a farmers' revolt, primarily from the Punjab and led by Sikhs. It has yet to be played out. Self-determination is perhaps about to make a comeback. We shall see. Likewise, it's often external factors that trigger off change or radical transformation. For example, in the Second World War, clearly led to Indian independence. But could the growing and Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean and India's northern borders trigger off something in that country? Again, we shall see. Yet India has evolved from a land of poor masses ruled by princes and bureaucrats into a semi-modern state, growing in affluence and increasingly exporting its culture and products, particularly to the West. The overhandedness of the police and army, the corruption and the religious fundamentalism, however, is across India has to bear. But so far, it's managed to keep a cap on the publicity external from India. But it has managed to do that, by and large, to prevent these factors overwhelming its governance, is given its inheritance quite an achievement. Whether it can sustain itself as an empire, or whether it will ultimately fragment as others have before it, only time will tell. The speakers today will look at what is happening right now in the areas most likely to split away. Thank you. So, my first speaker today is from Tamil Nadu, Saravana Krishna. Saravana comes from the south of India and belongs to the Tamil Nadu state, and is an active member of the Tamil People Welfare Organisation, which is also an emerging party since the 2016 Assembly elections. He will address his state's present issues on caste and self-determination and cover a few other topics such as employment in Tamil Nadu, political influence, economic power centres, new schemes approvals, and state fund allocations. Over to you, Saravana. Thank you.
Hi, good evening to all. As Tamil, we share the common racial and ethnic identity and belong to one race, even we spread out in different locations. We also have very strong cultural homogeneity. Our ways of dressing and food habits makes us special people. Tamil language is our mother tongue. Also, it's a binding factor even in our differences based on religion or regions. The state of Tamil Nadu is southernmost tip of India, sharing borders with the states like Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh. The capacity of Tamil Nadu is Chennai and the population of 72 million people. And the fourth largest contribution in our Indian GDP with an 80% of literacy rate. It has recently emerged as one of the leading states in terms of literacy. It's important the state is in our country. Over 80% of the residents of the state speak Tamil as their first language and also the mother tongue in our state. Today, no one questions whether the state is an integral part of India. However, during the 50s and 60s, the state of Tamil Nadu experienced an ethnic movement based on linguistic demands. The leaders of the movement claimed the Tamils were separate racial and cultural group and deserved at a minimum more autonomy power than new capital of India, which is the New Delhi. Some extreme side of the movement went as far to demand complete cession to form a separate Tamil nation, but they didn't. That time they didn't. The Tamil language is unique in that it does not share the common Sanskrit root with any other Indian languages. Tamil nationalist leaders used history claims that Dravidian languages, especially Tamil, were indigenous to the region before the arrival of Aryans and their dominations. Historically, Sanskrit was the language used by the elites, the high-class groups like Brahmins and other caste peoples, forward caste peoples. It was only accessible to the higher caste, particularly the Brahmins, and it was used to keep the lower caste out of the literature, education, and other occupations. With Brahmins access to the education and other resources, they were able to take advantages of the opportunities each and every moment in the Tamil history. There was also widely held belief at the turn of 20th century that Brahmins were racially different from the non-Brahmins. Sanskrit were associated with the Brahmins, and Tamil and other religion languages associated with lower castes. The anti-Brahmin movement started during the British Raj in India. As early as 1920s, the British tried to minimize the dominance of Brahmins in all the administrative occupations by promoting positions for non-Brahmins. There was a strong growth of linguistic pride, which helped to sow the seeds for a separatist movement for the creation of South Indian state or for the origin South Indians. The Tamil Welfare Organization was formed in the 1960s and was the first organizations to speak for the rights of non-Brahmins. But in Tamil Nadu now, there is no political power for the state local assembly because the central government plays major role in state governments and various part of Tamil people welfare and legislation and implementation in state welfare schemes. They start new projects like a nuclear power plant, Sterlite Industries, and a nuclear research center, and much more in our state, which is not useful for any of us in Tamil Nadu. And they try to serve the corporates, not for the local Tamil people. So I would like to conclude, we must have our own rights to design our future for our land and determination to do the right things, which is not harmful for our culture and people in Tamil Nadu. Thank you.
Thank you, Saravana. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Please stay on the line because we hope to have a little discussion at the end and there may be questions.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, for my next speaker, Kajaran Singh is the chairman of the Sikh group Dal Khalsa, and part of the World Human Rights Watch, which, as you know, is co-hosting this meeting. I believe he's the co-chair. So I'd like to introduce Kajaran Singh to give his presentation. Thank you. Will need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think if you wanted to understand the situation which Sikhs or Punjab is found itself in, I think the current the farmers' protest is a prime example where we have central government in Delhi more or less dictating terms on the people of Punjab, and while the Parliament or the Punjab Assembly has completely unanimously rejected any laws passed by the central government, and what that proves is there is a massive gap between the so-called democracy which India claims to be. When people of Punjab and the representatives of Punjab people in Punjab Assembly have no voice at all. They have unanimously passed that we reject any laws. And when we're looking at this farmer protest, what we have to realize, this is a move by the people of Punjab to get their own right to make their own laws and bring back power from Delhi. And I think this is where Chairman, you already pointed out that there has been an attempt being made to separate it from movement of people of Punjab asking for their right to govern and rule themselves, and just limit it to some kind of movement just based on 3 farm laws. But this is much more complicated than that, because the thing is, what we have to realize, India from day one, India or the states of India is been a bit of a failed experiment from day one, because from the time of power of transfer, when the British Empire transferred its power to fascist Hindutva regime at that time, what we have realized is degradation of fundamental basic human rights from day one. And the commitment of this regime has been to firstly remove all power from each and every single state and bring it to the center. And the reason for centralization is very, very simple for them, because they want to implement political policies which gives them complete power and have no opposition. And you can see the various laws that they have designed, either the laws which they have passed on the internet, either these farm laws, or the laws about dissent, or the laws about political protest. Look, people call India a democracy. This is a country which is saying that a certain percentage of citizens of India are not its citizens. It's taken according to the law it passed on CAA, it's taken away citizen from millions of people. And these are fundamental reasons why the power based in Delhi, which has taken complete control and been taken over by fascists, is a fundamental flawed way of governing the Indian Union. That's why when we see movements from the people of Punjab, what we have seen again and again, if you look at the current movement, what we have seen is this institutional form of racism which Sikhs are facing towards them. We have this Delhi regime and its controlled media, which has shown absolute hatred towards the Sikhs. If you look at the media representation and what's coming out of its media, it shows you, because Sikhs fundamentally reject the core basis on which this Indian political structure of the caste system, which is based on, that in result has resulted in a form of sheer hatred, which we see in and day out. And the fundamental problem that we are facing with that is not only that the Indian media is following that trend, but the Western so-called independent or more liberal media has followed the exact same pattern of terminologies when it comes to the Sikhs. But I think the political movement for bringing political rights to the people of Punjab is thriving. And till today, we are running the campaign for referendum 2020, and the membership of this campaign has gone through the roof, and it's reached near 10 million votes which we have registered, and we've still got time to register more votes. And what we have to see that the political will of people to not be governed by this fascist elite in Delhi is there, but what is missing is this globalist agenda, which sees the Indian superstate as a form of a tool to suppress that region, which is keeping this failed political project of India together. And what we have to do as activists is let international society understand that the politics in India represent a danger, not only to the people of India, but because these are people who are fundamentally fascist. Let's be clear, they want to eradicate Christianity, they want to eradicate Islam, and they want to form a global Hindu supremacy over the entire planet. And it's a nuclear power. These things have to be taken in account when we are understanding the politics of India and when we are engaging with the politics of India. And if this regime is not, if this regime keeps on getting this Western support, I think where we will have is where the branches of caste-based Indian imperialism will grab hold onto other countries and even Western democracies. That's why right to self-determination is the only way to defeat this fascism. Thank you.
Thank you, Kacharan. A very interesting, insightful contribution. Thank you for that. clearly there's a long way to go concerning what's happening within India and particularly Sikhs. And as we know, it's very topical with the farmers' revolt. And that's something no doubt we will speak in our discussion at the end. But I'd like to move on now to our next speaker on Kashmir. I may butcher your name, apologies.
That's all right.
Muzammil Ayub Thakkar.
Yeah, that'll do.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have your biography.
Muzammil, can you introduce yourself, please? That's why I'm sorry interrupting you. It's my fault. I didn't send it to you then.
That's not a problem. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and then give your presentation. Thank you.
Sure. I'll be brief with my bio only because I know how much limited time that we have. I was born in exile. My father was thrown out of Kashmir before I was born under penalty of death. He was the only person in India's history to be convicted of treason, convicted and tried of treason in absentia. Two Indian prime ministers came to the UK to try and extradite him, but they failed. So I've been working for the last maybe 15, 20 years inside the United Nations, European Parliament, the British Parliament. I've traveled quite a bit regarding Kashmir, trying to formulate public policy on Kashmir. But thank you for hosting me. For someone like me from Indian occupied Kashmir, this isn't just symbolic of your commitment towards Kashmiris, but it's a necessity to remind the world of its continued indifference to the oppressed and its complicity in India's never-ending violations by maintaining criminal silence and thus contributing to the annihilation of a nation. I'd like to begin with the most recent event of August 5th, 2019, when India illegally annexed occupied Kashmir against the United Nations Security Council resolutions and its continued blatant disregard of the Geneva Conventions. Now, hours before the clock struck midnight on the 5th of August 2019, the Kashmiri diaspora were flooded with goodbye messages from friends and relatives who sensed something ominous was about to happen, courtesy of the Indian government. And then more than 14 weeks of silence. Kashmir was cut off from the world, but more importantly, people like me were cut off from our loved ones. The world knew about what India had done, yet those India had done it had no idea due to the blanket ban on media and communications. While the world talks of 5G, space exploration, self-driving cars, advancements and innovations, India yet again threw Kashmir back into the Stone Ages. And as we sit here, we still don't know the full extent of what's happened in the last 12 months in Indian occupied Kashmir. With the additional Indian military forces sent to Kashmir, the total number of armed forces and military personnel now stands close to 1 million, further making Kashmir the densest military to civilian ratio in the world. It's also worth noting that India sent thousands of buses full of Indian migrants to Kashmir, as well as armed forces in civilian clothing, including intelligence operatives. Around 10 million people are living in a curfew, and public assembly was prohibited under Section 144 of the CRPC code. Last year, with limited information coming out, some reports said that more than 30,000 Kashmiris were preemptively arrested, with many transferred to jails outside Kashmir because the cells were overflowing with detainees. And in fact, the Telegraph reported on the 25th of September 2019 that more than 13,000 minors were subjected to abductions. And there's even evidence of children being kidnapped in the middle of the night and women being molested. Let alone the pro-freedom leadership, or what India terms the secessionist leadership, who have been resisting Indian occupation for decades. Even the mainstream pro-Indian politicians who were sitting in Kashmir were detained as well. Media was banned, mobile communication banned, and then downgraded from 4G to 2G. Most landlines banned, schools shut, businesses closed, causing $5 billion loss to economy, according to the KCCI. All former state industries suffered severe blows, pushing the majority into loan default or even closure. Food, water, medicine were running out, free movement restricted to the extent a young woman gave birth to a stillborn child because she was prevented from reaching the hospital. Funeral processions banned, death certificates banned. There were reports of people burying their loved ones in the backyard, in the garden. The injured, mostly by pellets but including bullets, were arrested if they went to the hospital. Closures of schools and universities gravely impaired education and added to the trauma of children and parents. Healthcare was severely restricted by curfew and roadblocks, and the local and regional media lost whatever little independence that they had. Kashmiris living abroad found out months later of family events. One young man learned that his fiancée died 4 months after it happened. A son who had not seen nor spoken to his mother in months watched a news channel where he accidentally saw a glimpse of her. Then there was the digital deaths, where WhatsApp numbers were suddenly deactivated because of inactivity, leaving friends and family fearful that maybe it represented something more insidious. And that was just the first few months after India illegally and unilaterally annexed occupied Kashmir, turning it from a de facto occupation to a de jure occupation. Now, whatever has happened in Kashmir is not ancient history. It's all happened in our lifetimes and continues to happen right now. But what's worse is that no one in Kashmir has known anything less than occupation, subjugation, oppression, hundreds of thousands dead, destruction of property and businesses in the billions, tens of thousands raped, innumerable enforced disappearances, thousands of mass and unmarked graves, human shields, torture, bullets, pellets, orphans, widows, half-widows, cyber cells, media blackouts, illegal draconian laws, false flag operations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide, demographic change, settler colonialism, fake and staged encounters. The list is endless. Now, the previous speaker was talking about the BJP, and I want to expand on that a little bit. Now, the BJP, headed by Modi and backed by a fanatical terror parent organization called the RSS, both fascist, right-wing, imperialistic, neo-colonial, expansionist organizations believing in their superior race and the need for cultural nationalism. Now, if that sounds like Nazism, that's because it is. They openly praise Hitler and Mussolini and accept taking inspiration from Nazism to implement their ideology. One party, one culture, one nation. And under the BJP, the Indian judiciary has finally been given the freedom to be used as a tool to impose, institutionalize, and legalize the BJP's reign of terror, Hindutva terror, which has led to an implosion within India, especially after the CAA, NRC, and Farmers' Bill controversy. The same people who are banging the drums of war against the people of Kashmir are facing the merchants of death themselves. And now we see the farmers' protests and the consequence people have faced for reporting, tweeting, and posting on social media. Case in point, Greta Thunberg and Rihanna. But by unilaterally abrogating the articles, going back a little bit, India have desecrated their own constitution, which clearly states no changes can be made to Kashmir without consultation and approval from the Jammu Kashmir Legislative Assembly. India have broken their own past promises for holding a plebiscite in Kashmir and have been changing the nature of Kashmir for years. And it reflects a blatant disregard India has for the UN resolutions, international laws, but also demonstrates the openly sinister politics of Narendra Modi, the BJP, and the RSS. And whatever little time I have left, I want to give a few examples of India's growing list of crimes in Kashmir. Now, there are torture centers where unimaginable forms of cruelty have been meted out, stories of electrocution, pliers used to pull nails, rollers used for flattening roads used on legs, salt and chili in wounds, detainees held in cells with hungry rats forced to consume their own urine, and worse. And even many have faced sodomy. The New York Times reports in 2019 that abductees were tortured in mosques with the loudspeakers turned on to instill fear and terror in the population. And that was in my hometown, where my family members have suffered as well. Al Jazeera 2020 reported about 3-year-old Ayad, 3 years old, who witnessed the cold-blooded murder of his grandfather. BBC in 2018 talked about 18-month-old Hiba, probably the youngest victim of pellet guns, permanently blinded in one eye while she was sitting in her mother's lap. The Guardian talked about 5-year-old Samir Rah, 5 years old, who had the army picked him up, punctured his eye with a needle, and then that was Nasir. 5-year-old Nasir picked up, punctured his eye with a needle, and then sand poured into it. And the Guardian reported about Samir Rah, who was picked up, a stick shoved down his throat, his head played with like a football, and then his throat stamped upon, killing him instantly. Channel 4 talked about Kalandar, who had his legs amputated and was force-fed his own flesh. And then the Police Project, who published excerpts of testimonies from victims of rape and gang rape of Kunan Pushpura, where one name springs to mind, which is Tamanna. She was 9 months pregnant, raped, gang raped, and then gave birth to a son with a broken arm 3 days later. Journalists are not spared. They're interrogated, arrested, and even have cases lodged against them. One of them, Asif Sultan, and when he left home, when he was arrested, he had a 6-month-old daughter at home, and she barely recognizes her own father. Several months ago, my friend, my very dear friend, Babar Qadri, a vociferous lawyer, was killed in his own home in front of his own family. I know my time has come to a close, so I end with a reminder that the world community condemned and intervened in atrocities committed by the Nazis, the genocide in Rwanda, the ethnic cleansing in Srebrenica, war crimes in Chechnya, crimes against humanity in Uganda, the settler colonial and demographic change in Palestine. An Indian-occupied Kashmir has witnessed it all, experienced it all, and suffered through it all. Yet the pressure and reaction that should exist doesn't, despite India's blatant and brazen disregard of the UN resolutions, Geneva Conventions, humanitarian and international law. And until and unless India is de-radicalized, we'll continue to witness a rise in extremism and terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Muzammil. That was a very wide-reaching, lots of information to take on board. I think most people here probably are aware of some of the things that you've described, some of the shocking things you've described. But our problem, and we'll come to it at the end, is the West doesn't know. And obviously, as you quite rightly mentioned, the lockdown, we've in the UK, of course, had lockdown, lots of European countries had lockdown, but Kashmir had a lockdown since August 2019. And the purpose of that lockdown, of course, was to prevent the rest of the world finding out about what's happening there. And this is a typical totalitarian approach to politics. And of course, you may think it's difficult because of the internet and everything else, but China and India, for instance, have both become quite adept at controlling information. But thank you very much for that. And hopefully you'll stay around and contribute later for the debate. Now, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. I think he's on, Franz.
Yes.
Thank you, Franz. Franz Wellman is a photojournalist, writer and documentary filmmaker based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Starting out as a clinical psychologist with a preference for cross-cultural psychology, he used that focus to start a journey that carried him from Botswana to Brazil via Kenya and the Cameroons to Indonesia, India, Indochina, and from West Papua to Peru to eventually land on the doorstep of Nagaland. I've no idea whether that was deliberate, but it's quite random. But I think the Naga people are probably pleased because Franz, I think, is one of the world's experts outside Nagaland on that issue. Finally, working in the prominent Dutch Anthropological Royal Tropical Museum Education Department for quite a few years, brought him the conviction to stand for Indigenous people's rights to self-determination and self-rule. As a visual artist, Franz Wellman brings these peoples and their environments to light as his never-ending journey continues. Franz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, I have written a letter to the government of the United Kingdom because one of the aspects of the conflict is forgotten, because the United Kingdom, not the United Kingdom really, but the Great Britain before, never showed the paper of handing over Nagaland to India. And so we wrote now a letter. I'm part of the Netherlands Naga International Support Center. And so I'd like to read the letter to you. The host says I have to start the video. How? To the government of the United Kingdom, formerly known as Great Britain. On the basis of the Freedom of Information Act, we request the government of the United Kingdom to officially make the actual handover papers of Nagaland to the Union of India available to the Naga peoples and the international community. From you, we, the British Authority, we demand a singular and clear-cut answer to this request. In 1947, one day ahead of India, Nagaland proclaimed its independence to the United Nations. Great Britain, now the government of the United Kingdom, knows this well and good, but did not act or react. The United Nations confirmed the reception of the Declaration of Independence, but also did not act. Though it is not known if and when an official paper of ceding Nagaland to India was signed and published to the Nagas, it is somehow on the basis of the verbal knowledge of all parties concerned, Great Britain, India, and Nagaland did not contest it. Just before Great Britain left its colonies of South Asia, its British administrators, district officers warned when it would leave the Nagas to be with India, that this would create big trouble, if not war. And these district officers knew the Nagas well, for already in 1929, told the Silent Commission in Nagaland to find out what Nagas wanted. Nagas told them the occasion they wanted to be free the way they wanted, like they were before the British had colonized them. They wanted to determine their own future. Another complicated matter creating confusion, the matter of Great Britain having administered 25% of Nagaland. The colonizing nation itself, as you know, hold approximately 75% unadministered areas of free Nagas. Tell the Nagas how Great Britain could have handed over to India something it had not administered or in lay terms had never owned. Then in 1953, to the chagrin of the Nagas, about 1/3 of Nagaland was ceded to Burma by the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. When Great Britain left it, it did not look back. Well, you did not only remember the Kohima Second World War cemetery, well, until now, every year, some British survivors visit and pay homage to the Nagas and fellow British who fought against the Japanese. And Great Britain knows that without the Nagas, you could not have stopped the Japanese at all. Knowing very well India wanted to secure the borders and thinking like so many colonial powers did with indigenous peoples, that Nagas could not look after themselves and handed Nagaland to India. You did this without consulting the Nagas. You also did not intervene when Jawaharlal Nehru in 1953 ceded Eastern Nagaland to Burma. From the point of view of the retreating colonizer, this could have been a valid thought. But knowing that Nagas were both capable of withstanding powers like Great Britain and its successor, India, must have astonished you. But still, you did not act. Since the United Kingdom is a proper democratic nation, we avail of you to redeem the past. We don't think it could have escaped you what happened to the Nagas when they resisted to be colonized again, this time by India, because Nagas fought for you in Europe during the First World War, and in Nagaland without you against the Japanese. And gesture of goodwill and friendship, you should publish the handover papers to prove Nagaland had become part of India. From your point of view, Nagaland is the legacy of your colonial past. Years ago, Nagas tried to find these papers in the British Library, but were not successful. Consequently, if these papers do not exist, then be kind enough to publish that as a fact and tell India it should stop its occupation of Nagaland after 7 decades instead. After decades, instead set the Nagas free. Not making the handover paper public means that you don't feel responsible for what you have caused. No accountability meant suffering of Nagas, even today. There are no less than 200,000 Indian military on Nagaland soil. And during 7 decades of occupation, an estimated 300,000 Nagas have lost their lives or were brutally tortured and raped. With disclosing the handover paper, you could stop this war India began against Nagas. Your role was and is important even today. Okay. That's it, I think.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Franz. We are experiencing a legacy of empire, that Britain is responsible for many things around the world. Many decolonizations were not properly carried out. They just wanted to run away, and unfortunately didn't even attempt to put back what they found when they first arrived. And I have to say, this is the same for most countries. The whole Holland, where you come from, of course, have done that in Indonesia.
Yes.
Created
Papua New Guinea.
a totally false and artificial country called Indonesia.
Right.
And they've included many peoples that should not be united by force as they were. However, that's another story.
Well, you had the same problem with New Guinea.
Indeed. So this is something that the colonial empires or ex-colonial empires will have to answer for. And it's something we'll come back to near the end of this conference. I've got probably 3 other speakers now. If like a couple of short presentations, I think Zishan wants to say something, then Dr. Mustafa, and then, sorry, I think I was muted there. I was just trying to explain. We've got 3 other speakers, Zishan, Mustafa, and then a third one we're just waiting to arrive. So if Zishan wants to say a couple of words on what we're talking about, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Williamson. And thank you for letting me speak this afternoon, even though I think I was not scheduled to talk. I totally agree with Mr. Franz Wehmann about the legacies of British colonialism and the problems that are left behind. And if we are, like we were talking about India and Kashmir and India overall, you would see a different India before East India Company went to India. And India was totally different, and there was legacy of nepotism, corruption, and imposed feudalism in India after British or in the process of British leaving the India. If we look at self-determination, it is a right inherent in women, in any human, irrespective of their ethnic background or their religious belief or their geographical locations. And if self-determination right is to deny, then that particular part of world is denied all other human rights. This is my take on it, because if you don't have freedom to choose what you believe in as your government, or you are imposed a foreigner in your land, then your daily life is dependent on the rules being imposed on you by these foreigners. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for that contribution. Everybody have an opportunity as we come near to the end of the presentations. I think Dr. Mustafa wants to just say a few words. Thank you.
Someone need to unmute him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your contribution and allowing me to have a few words. Self-determination is an international law applicable to everybody who are oppressed and who are able to pursue due process of international law. Like state, since Westphalia 1648, has a meaning because of a Treaty of Westphalia, Innsbruck, Paris Treaty, and the First World War Versailles treaties international order is also part of League of Nations and the United Nations Charter treaties. Self-determination, Article 1, paragraph 2, third sentence is equality of nations and self-determination of people. Providing, if I take you to Quebec case immediately into the 21st century, providing the central government oppresses you, you have no representatives in the central government, providing your local government is oppressing all the ethnic minorities and linguistically different religious groups, providing literally everybody is sitting on you like a caste system. The moment you see that cessation of oppression, then you have a right for self-determination, providing you follow international law due process. I'm going to say the next most unfitable expression for a lawyer. When all comes to an end, you must think what to do next. Die kneeling down or die standing up. That's not suitable expression for international lawyer. But if the international community, as in the case of dear friend Muzamil Ayub Takur, with regards to his experience and Palestinians and the Turkish Cypriots to which I belong, if international community, international treaties are oblivious and indifferent, then you got to decide what to do. And I think I ought to thank you for a few minutes of outburst again. And I support your movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa, for that incisive call for self-determination. I'll just make a remark on the United Nations. Often people do say to us, oh, well, the United Nations in its articles talks about self-determination. It does on many declarations, it refers to self-determination. But sadly, we have to accept the reality that when the United Nations was formed, I think it met in San Francisco in early 1945, when there was still the Second World War was still raging at that point. It was a United States convention. The United States, when it put in self-determination, it had in mind the dismantling of the European colonial empires. Why? It wasn't necessarily a moral imperative. It did it because it feared European imperial preferences, trade preferences with the Commonwealth, which didn't exist, of course, then, French Empire, Dutch Empire, etc. So it had in mind self-determination of peoples in Africa and Asia, which would allow the colonial empire's hegemony to disappear and be replaced by the United States hegemony. That is the reality, because the United Nations, by and large, has ignored self-determination because it believes that self-determination has been completed with the breakup of the European empires. And of course, it wasn't broken up and it still exists, except rather than having a British ruler, you have an Indian ruler or an Indonesian ruler, etc., etc. So I'm just going to see if the final speaker has arrived yet. If not, let me just check. If the chair could just check the waiting room, Nazar. If you could just check the waiting room. If not, we'll let him speak later if he manages to arrive. But I'm going to open it to discussion. So Mustafa.
There's nobody, Grant, there's nobody in a waiting room.
At the moment, okay. I'll move on for the meantime with a general discussion. So I'm going to ask Mustafa to say a few points. If anybody else wants to come in, if you could just use the either hand or the yellow reaction button. Mustafa.
Thank you. With regards to precarious start of self-determination, Article 1, Paragraph 2, I have even greater sadness to report that that paragraph came in the back of a car on the way to the self-determination United Nations room, and it was Russians who introduced it. It was the Russian, I think it was Gromyko. He actually thought, I better pencil this in, because the actual script in the San Francisco Hall didn't contain that section. and it was introduced just there and then. Forget all the pictures, forget all the deliveries, a certain lady reading Human Rights Charter. It wasn't there at all. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think the next speaker might be trying to join. Nazar, if you could just check for me, I'll put it out for a general discussion, if not.
No one in the waiting room.
Okay. No worries. Let's go for a general discussion for now. So anybody
Actually, we've got Jagdish Singh in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Let's introduce Jagdish, let him speak, and then we'll all have a chat afterwards. Thank you.
Unmute him. Unmute him.
He's unmute.
Jagdish, I'm just going to read I think we didn't do a presentation of you, Jagdish. I think most people on this platform will know about Jagdish Singh, but maybe some don't know. So I'll just read your little bio, if I may, Jagdish. I want you to
go on.
speak it. So Jagdish Singh is a legal advisor, born in the UK of Punjabi Sikh background and social cultural upbringing. He's one of the founders of Nations Without States press group, which, as you know, we are hosting today, and chairman of the 1984 Genocide Coalition. He has an idealistic and ethical approach to human life and world affairs. He draws this principally from the inspiring activistic Sikh philosophy and history, coupled with wider global idealism and histories of struggle for justice. He's been involved in justice campaigns since the age of 13 years, from 1984, the year when he was gripped by the horrifying genocide against the Sikh people in the Indian state. He has been directly involved in frontline activism on a range of justice issues, including Punjab, honour killings, animal rights, environmental protection, welfare of nature, global self-determination of nations, empowerment of small grassroots communities and nations, and the dismantling of superstates and superstructures. That's a very hard act to follow, Jagdish. But if you could speak on awareness, how can we get awareness to the West, politically, morally, and any other method, because the West seems to be quite ignorant of what's happening in India. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I would say again, very forcefully, that Western countries or states are not ignorant. We've just seen, we're literally witnessing in the last day or so, the grand visit from the United States of America, sending over a black-colored defense minister to India, and the grand meetings and declarations that are taking place there. He made a declaration, this minister, defense minister for the United States of America, he literally made this profound statement that we and India are the world's two largest democracies. Now, such colorful declarations, what are they? They're just panderings to each other, such platitudes and such cozy declarations of friendship. The reality is, the United States of America, its government, its individual ministers, its members, and everyone that matters is very much aware of what's actually going on in India. The fact that they choose to ignore it, brush it under the carpet, and choose not to make it the subject of dialogue or discussion is entirely in keeping with one state scratching another state's back. And I've often reflected that these states that we see around the world, in which India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and all the states around the world, Egypt, Turkey, Britain, and many, many more, are all fully engaged in, is the age-old game playing of when kings and queens, having conquered their territories, then simply make deals with each other as to, you'll stay off my patch and I'll stay off yours. You'll agree not to interfere in my affairs and I won't interfere in yours. But as to how I kill my people, as to how I suppress the peasants, as to how many women I rape, as to how many Sikhs I murder, as to how many how much environmental devastation I cause, that's my choice. That's an internal matter. I will do that, and I will let you do that in your patch. So what we're seeing today on a modern level, in modern times, is simply a reproduction of that very same power system, that power relationship that existed in the 1100s, in the 5th century, in the 10th century, in the 15th century. We're just seeing a modern replication of that. And coming down to the issue of we, the small nations, the disempowered, stateless nations, we were exactly the same in the 5th century. The small, disempowered people, no voice, no power. Today, all we have is perhaps our sense of national collectiveness and a national aspirations, the Tamils, the Punjabis, the Kurds, the Palestinians. It's become more pronounced, but the power relationship is exactly the same. And I've shared this many a time with Graham and other colleagues in the Nations Without State system. Graham, I've often, I will share with you, found a bit baffling and both commendable. Graham seems to be full of energy. Let's do this and let's do that and let's do this. And the thing I've often shared with him is I feel burnt out with all the activism because I don't feel that we're getting anywhere. And that's a genuine feeling, and I could be wrong. Because for all the petitions and all the campaigning and for all the attempts at campaigning that we've done in multifarious forms, I've come to the conclusion that nobody's listening. And when I say nobody, I mean the big power structure, the international systems that govern over us, the United Nations, the European Unions, the association of whatever states, individual states. Who gives a fuck about us? We're nobodies. So, you know, in all this power relationship, we're just a nuisance. China's not speaking up for us, for the Punjab, for example. Pakistan's not speaking up for us. We're just a nuisance making entity within the Indian state. And the Indian state, when it sort of gets fed up with us, it fires us down. It uses physical force to crush us until the next time, And the question that cries out from all this, how are we going to change this? Can we change it? Are we doomed to suffer more of it? Is it the way things are always going to be? You know, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sorry to say that, but I don't. I just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sorry, Graham. But this is the thing. This touches the critical thing, that the power systems and the power structures are such, they don't exist for us. And we have no stake in those power systems. And therefore, by trying to dismantle, disrupt, destroy, or replace them with small-scale, self-determining power structures, we're actually coming into direct conflict with them. And every time the winner and loser in that is us, the David versus the Goliath. We always lose because we got no voice, we got no power, militarily, economically, or otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagdish. Thank you for that contribution, even though it seems rather bleak. I will just make a couple of comments on that before we go out to general debate, and I think Gurnan wants to say something in a minute. Just to address a couple of points Jagdish made. Yes, of course, things look bleak. Some of you have been campaigning for independence for Kashmir or Punjab, wherever, for many years, all your life, perhaps, all your adult life. However, we know that countries don't speak about other countries generally because many of them have skeletons in their own cupboard and they don't want that rattled. So they obviously cover up for it. But in reality, of course, since 1960 plus, there have been a number of states that have come into existence: Kosovo, South Sudan, East Timor. It is not impossible for that to happen, but the ingredients for how it happens, yes, that is peculiar. In other words, it tends to be geopolitical. It's not because of the efforts usually of the nation struggling against the occupying nation. It's normally because some big power decides it's in their interest to weaken that particular power or embolden the weaker nation because it suits them geopolitically. If you were in the Fretilin movement in East Timor, before they were independent, I think they had about 10,000 at best fighters, probably less, and a 100,000 strong Indonesian army. They were never, ever going to win, not in a million years, but they did. But they didn't win because of their military prowess. They won because the rest of the world, or particularly Australia, and to some extent, the United States, decided that it suited them to take on Indonesia as a regional power. It was hit by economic misfortune, and the oil boycott, which Australia, etc., were imposing, in East Timor was sacrificed by Indonesia for that reason. So what I'm saying is there is hope, geopolitical hope. And I think I mentioned in my presentation about China. China's not interested, obviously, in the freedom of people around the world, but China's interested in itself. But China rubs up against other global powers like India. And of course, as if you like, unintended consequence, China's conflict with India could lead to Kashmir becoming independent. Just an extreme possibility. But history shows that that has actually happened. What do we have to do? We're going to put this out to debate in a second. What we have to do is promote the idea of self-determination and wait for those geopolitical jigsaw come together. That's my opinion. I'm going to be quiet for a moment. I'm going to ask Gurnam Singh to start off the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham, and thank you to all the speakers for your wonderful insights. I detected a bit of pessimism coming from Jagdish's talk, and also from Thakur Sahib's almost kind of horrific kind of a depiction, which is a true depiction of Modi's fascist violence, yeah? But I wanted to really say that we shouldn't be that pessimistic. And I want to remind us the fact that, 95% of the countries of the world came into existence in the last 100 years. The world is like the oceans of the world. It keeps churning. The British Empire, which was ruling 30% of the world, maybe more than that, is now a pathetic offshore, statelet, which is actually in turmoil with itself. The Scots, the Irish and the Welsh also, and then it'll be the Northerners and the Yorkshiremen and people like that, yeah? So what I want to suggest is that, and if you look at the Punjabi farmers who have taken on, it's like a David and Goliath. And believe you me, Modi is rattled big time. This is a revolutionary movement. I just want to remind us of a couple of things, but we've all been feeling like that, Jagdish. Charles Dickens famously in his famous piece, A Tale of Two Cities, was writing at the time of the French Revolution. So the two cities was London and France. And he was looking over to France. And this is how he described it. He says, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light. It was a season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was a winter of despair. So I think that in these kind of moments, in some senses, when we feel so much despair, then we connect with other people. And you know what? There's a fight or flight syndrome comes in. When you've got nothing else, those Punjabi farmers, some of them locked their farmhouse and said, look, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die fighting. And it's that spirit that then inspires nations. Let me just give you one more, we talked about the Soviet Union collapsing. It actually didn't last that long. Karl Marx said something very interesting in the Communist Manifesto. He said that all that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. And what Marx was observing there was the way in which moments in history where you think nothing is possible, then everything comes possible, yeah? And I think that we are at that moment now. The tragedy is that in those moments of crisis, many, many people lose their lives. But don't think that these people are not, they're not edifices. Boris Johnson is pathetic. Modi is pathetic. Donald Trump is pathetic. And the people around them know that. So don't be afraid. Keep speaking the truth. And remember, it's the ordinary people who give them power, and the ordinary people can take power away from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurnham. Obviously, we have a few speakers from abroad. Obviously, we have a Tamil speaker. We have a gentleman representing Kashmir and France and the Naga people, and obviously a few Sikhs. So, you know, if anybody wants to address those individuals, it'd be much appreciated. I think Nazar wants to say something first.
Yes, I partly agree with Jagdish, but what we do, we carry on struggling. Jagdish know me. We've been part of the different platforms together trying to improve things, but don't give up. Answer is don't give up. Just carry on trying. Some of the things are in our control, some of the things aren't our control. At least we can do what is in our control. Carry on working, awareness, which we do, whatever the day today, Sunday. We sacrifice our day, we all here, because we believe on the cause, because we believe on self-determination. We believe on caste is not good enough for humanity. That's why we're here. Jagdish, I appreciate the feeling you have. Sometimes I feel that some of the things I do for community cohesion and equality and anti-hate campaigns, you are hitting the brick wall. But brother, I'll say one thing, all of you, don't give up. Time will come. We will achieve our targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nazar. And I would make the point that if we don't achieve it, your sons and daughters may achieve it. We are part of a ancestral line, or you all are part of the ancestral line, and you can all achieve something, because if you don't do it, your sons and daughters won't probably do it, will they? And most people I know are activists. Often their parents were activists. It's inherited. So unfortunately, Jagdish, it's incumbent upon you and everybody else to keep up the struggle in some form or fashion. Zishan wants to speak. Thank you.
I'm very grateful. Look, I totally appreciate the points raised by Jagdish Paji. It was just a frustration of losing time against objectives and the thing everyone wanted to achieve. And we can see our bones are not active enough to run as we used to run. It is totally appreciative. And if Mr. Thakur made a very pressing statistical speech about Kashmir, and I would tell everyone every day when I wake up, I don't normally watch news for this reason, because it's not only oppression that is destroying humanity, it's also poverty around the world and other issues. My heart bleeds when I see a woman is raped in Kashmir or Palestine or in any other part of the world, or there's a shortage of water and people are walking miles of miles to get the water. But what I would say to Jagdish Paji, I am the light at the end of tunnel. Everyone in this room is the light at the end of tunnel because we are still talking. We have not given up talking. And we are leaving a legacy to our next generation. We are telling them where we started from, where we failed, what did we achieve, and what we could not achieve. And they need to pass the candle to their next generation until the time that you call powerhouse is destroyed. I can tell you, when I was studying international law in my master's, I just picked one point. Irrespective of the reasons of wars around the globe in centuries, it was always economic, financial greed. Name of religion, name of territory, name of some ethnic background was used, but at the end of the day, humanity fought with each other to grab more resources. There were no other reasons. And every era had its own demand. If I was living in 17th century, I would pick up the sword and start fighting. Or 18th century, I would engage into warfares. But in this century, the has different meaning. It's a diplomacy. It's knowing what to say, how to say, where to say, when to say. We created United Nations to bring all the nations under one at one platform to talk about rights and to admire and appreciate rights in the same way we did in social contract theory and surrendered over sovereignty to one government or a ruler. And but what did we cleverly did in United Nations? We gave the veto power to five countries, so nothing can be done until it is liked by these five countries. So we have cornered ourselves in United Nations. So United Nations can do number of things and cannot do many things unless you have equal access to the resources on the platform of United Nations when it comes to passing a resolution or undertaking an action. And clear example is International Criminal Court, where you can go through their website. All the prosecutions are against ethnic minorities. You would never see Tony Blair International Criminal Court for all the war crimes in Iraq and other countries, or Bush in Afghanistan. So let's be realistic. Let's tell our next generations that we have tried our best to engage a fight from outside the house. We've been protesting, we have been contesting, but we could not bring a change. We need to teach our next generations to qualify and to learn the rules of diplomacy, to go inside the house, inside the parliament, inside the United Nations, and become a powerhouse. You cannot break a powerhouse, but you can become part of the powerhouse to defeat the powerhouse. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Zishan. I'm going to just take an executive order and ask three of the speakers just to find out from them where the situation is for those minority nationalities in India. So I'd like to ask Franz first. What is the situation with the Nagas? Just very, very briefly, what is the situation with the Nagas as we speak, and what is their future as you see it? Franz. Can somebody unmute? Azar, can you unmute Franz, please? Thank you.
The situation is unchanged. The peace talks are still on. The oldest freedom fighter in the world, 86 years old, is still the one in charge of that. In Delhi, they are there for a few months. 17 years already, from 1997, the peace talk started, and it is now 2021. Next door, there is Burma, there's also Nagas there, and you see what's happening there. That's why I agree with Jagdish. It's very bleak. Nobody interferes in the situation that is arising in Burma. He pointed out that a nation will be respected for what it is, and you don't interfere in the internal matters. But what is internal, really? It should be that Britain would tell that it gave away something they didn't own. And how can it be like that? And then you see what happens in Burma. Dead people killed in the streets. I've been there a few times in Burma. Beautiful people, but a very, very bleak military government. And nobody in the world, not the international community, intervenes. No, situation is stable, but I mean stable in the sense that there's no change, indeed. So I'm also bleak. I'm also agreeing with Jagdish. On the other hand, of course, we have to continue still. But it's bleak.
Thank you, Franz. Yes, we all know that most struggles that exist. I believe there was a study that recently done said, and Jagdish won't probably know this, there's about 140 alleged or real nations, should we say, struggling for some kind of autonomy or independence. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. We've only got 3 or 4 here today. There's another 130 plus out there. Some, of course, not quite as, shall we say, popular, and others are very popular. And what I mean is if you're in Kashmir and you had a referendum, which, by the way, is Nations Without States' solution to all these problems, the UN supervised referendum around the world in those contentious areas. And Kashmir probably would vote for independence, whereas Occitania in France probably wouldn't. But nevertheless, 140, that's very significant. So I believe it's our duty to fly that flag, or all those flags, shall we say. Now, I want to ask next is Saravana from Tamil Nadu. I'd like to ask Saravana.
Hi.
Hi there. What do you think is the future of Tamil Nadu? Will Tamil Nadu start to ask for India to intervene in Sri Lanka? Will it ask them to give more autonomy for Tamil Nadu? What do you think?
Yeah, from Tamil Nadu, I think India give a voice to the Tamil Sri Lankan people who are suffering in Sri Lanka, and they have to give some political identification in our country of Tamil Nadu as well as in India.
I understand that you say they should or must. Yeah. But in reality, it seems India doesn't want to upset Sri Lanka because it's a geopolitical fight with China, because China seems to have captured the Sinhalese Sri Lanka, in other words, politically. So
yeah, they invest in the harbors.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to talk about that. However, just to say that geopolitics can also make countries suppress nations like the Tamils in Sri Lanka, and it can equally go the other way too. So unfortunately, India, who could be a solution to Sri Lankan issue, is refusing to do so, partly because it's got skeletons, as we know, within its own cupboard. And if Tamil's got independence in the north of Sri Lanka, Kashmiris would say, what about us in India? So unfortunately, these big powers only help the small nations when it suits them. And at the moment, it doesn't suit India. Thank you for that, Saravana, and I much appreciate you being on today with us. Very enlightening. So I'd like to move on to Muzammil to ask what you think is the future of Kashmir in a practical sense over the next few years. What do you think is going to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, although I share the both contrasting sentiments from Jagdish or Gurnam, there's always hope, but at the same time we have to be kind of realistic of what have we achieved, where are we right now, and I think I probably would be interested to understand more about the mechanisms that exist for underrepresented people. So somebody like Dr. Ahmed Mustafa may be able to clarify how the ICJ, and I understand there are mechanisms that exist in the ICJ and the ICC specifically for nations, because it's sovereign nations that can take other sovereign nations to the courts. However, there are loopholes where NGOs or institutions can also do the same. So I think the most important thing is recognizing our successes, but understanding what our failures are and why those failures exist. And one of those failures is always, to me at least, what I've seen in our movement, at least of the Kashmir movement, is strategy and understanding not necessarily understanding global politics. We understand what happens. It's pretty obvious now. But understanding the mechanisms that exist that are in place for us that we can utilize and we can use. So somebody mentioned about going through the power corridors and being those people of power and influencing public policy and whatnot. But the problem is that a lot of our MPs or people that we look up to or people from our community, once they get into those power corridors, suddenly the language changes. Suddenly their methodology changes, and I don't understand it. And I'll talk about my own community. Before they come into power, before they get into those power corridors and those positions of influence, they are some of the best activists that you could possibly imagine. But the moment they get in power corridors, suddenly there seems to be a blanket on a lot of the work that they do. And most of the language that they start using is rhetoric as opposed to tangible things, or even the work that should be done, that they were doing previously, no longer exists. And I think that we need to understand, and sometimes I think it's also our responsibility to hold our representatives, elected representatives accountable for what they're doing. And if they're not doing it, shove them out. I mean, I don't need a person like that. Fine, I have issues about, you know, the roads and the binmen coming at the wrong time, and yeah, that's fine. But at the same time, I'm in the position that I'm in. I elect a representative that is going to represent me of what concerns me specifically. And if he's not going to do that, get rid of him. And I don't think we should be afraid of churning people out that claim to represent us. If you're going to claim it, then do it. And in the context of Kashmir, it's the same thing. Or if, for that matter, for the people of Punjab, and I don't know whether this is going to be a controversial term, but even for those people that are fighting for Khalistan, there are mechanisms in place, and I think underrepresented, the organization are underrepresented nations. There needs to be a coalition of people that have the skill set, that understand that there are things that maybe Nazar Saab knows that I don't know, Franz knows that I don't know, Jagdish knows that I don't know, or maybe something that I know that Gurnam doesn't know. I know that Zishan doesn't know. I know that Dr. Mustafa doesn't know. And I think the sharing of knowledge is important to understand or to create a roadmap. And it's not necessarily that it's going to be Kashmir that is going to pave the way. For God's sake, my win is going to be a win for other people. So when we use the examples of East Timor, or we use the examples of South Sudan, or we use any other examples, the purpose for that is because their win is something that I can build upon. I think that that's something that we need to do, start creating our own coalitions. And whatever is happening in India, I agree with Gurnam that Modi is pathetic and he's exposed, but the problem is there isn't anybody that's doing anything about it. And Dr. Mustafa also said that it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees. And I understand that specifically as well, that there has to be an element of fight. And I would go so far as to say that when diplomacy doesn't work, I will never condemn the United Nations resolutions that permits people to protect their land, protect their people, protect their property by use of force. I can never condemn that. So I think that the reality is that if armed resistance is going to start or has started or will start, it is not because of our action. It is because of our reaction, and that has to be recognized, that any form of violence that is perpetrated is not something that is done willfully or by design. It is done because of a reaction to other forms of violence. So whatever is happening on the outskirts of Delhi, whatever is happening in Punjab, whatever is happening in Nagaland with the Tamils, with the Naxals, with the Kashmiris, any form of violence that has happened is not the responsibility, and the onus is not on the people to stop that violence. The onus and responsibility is on the government that perpetrates the initial violence in the first place. And I think I'll probably end with that.
Thank you for that, Muzamil. That was very passionate and some excellent points made. When Nations Without States was formed, our idea was to give a platform to these 140 nations and territories that were, crying out for some recognition at the very least. And we've tried to do that. But we have talked about, and we haven't actually put it into practice, is to help create strategies for how we can repeat that. And I would love to be able to work with yourselves, with Kashmiris, with Naga people, with West Papians, with the 140 peoples to find a solution, drawing upon the history of those who have found a solution, like East Timor, Kosovo, South Sudan, etc., etc. Anyway, we're coming near to the end, but I want Dr. Mustafa to come in to talk about what he believes is the options for self-determinists to fight back against those who are oppressing them. Dr. Mustafa, please.
Thank you. Referring to Brother Muzamil, I got involved in these affairs with Cyprus in 1964. I'm still involved. I'm 72 years old. Western Africa case to International Court of Justice in 1949. East Timor case quite recently. The wall in Jerusalem, 2011. We are still on a very slow journey. On the other hand, I took my earphones off when you were describing the cruelty, the inhumanity. I was ostracizing myself in front of all of you that I can't cope with this pain. But then I do cope with it because I'm still fighting against it. The answer, there is no answer. Here, take this tablets 5 times a day and you will be all right. And you know that. That's not what you're asking me to tell you. But what I will impeach, what I will beseech you, what I will ask you to follow is this. Keep on talking. Even people like me take the earphones off. You got to talk, talk, talk. Then write, write, write. Then besiege, besiege, besiege. But don't give up. And my dear friend, I know you didn't give up because you don't want to give up, because you haven't given up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Mr. Chairman, the job, the function, the full moral obligation that you are discharging today is for all those who have no names, no graves, and for all those who will have no names, who will have no graves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. I'm coming near to the end, but did Dr. Gurnham want
Yeah, I just wanted to come in. I think Mozamil said something really important, and others might want to come in. You see, there's a kind of common sense view that human beings can become tribal and they kill other human beings. I think this is one of the biggest myths that have been propagated by imperialists, colonialists, and capitalists. What I see on the borders of Delhi are Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Tamils, Maharathis, women, men, disabled people of all faiths coming together, feeding each other, protecting each other, and fighting Buddhi. But what I do see, and I think this is a crucial issue that we need to get our heads around, is that the political class, I think that's what you're referring to, Thakurji, is that because of the system is rigged. So if you if you become a political activist and you go then into the political class, then you become part of the problem. So I think the real challenge is for us to re-envisage participatory democracy. And if you think about it, you know, indigenous people don't kill outsiders. Indigenous people feed outsiders. It's outsiders who killed indigenous people. So we need to learn from how indigenous people have for centuries organized society. And sadly, I think we need to envisage a world beyond capital, not because of some Marxist revolution, because Marxism has destroyed the world as well, but because if you ask any human being on the planet, do you agree that we should save the planet, the ecology of the planet, the nature of the planet? They will say yes. Do you believe that human beings should be treated with dignity? Yes. Do you believe that we should have equity of resources? Yes. Everybody believes that. So our challenge is not to persuade people of the righteousness of our argument. That's a universal. It's now to say, join us, just like we've seen on the borders of Delhi. And we expand that. And I think that's the way the politicians will realize they have no future.
Thank you, Gurnham. I think just a couple of comments on what's been said so far before we wind up. Yes, it's true. I think what we need is awareness, because I think people would support self-determination. I mean, goodness me, in the UK, we've had referendums, had the Brexit referendum, which is about self-determination. We have the Scottish referendum, we've had Irish referendums. Politicians from your community and other communities who you would expect and hope would take up the cudgel for your cause don't, when they become corrupted by the political class. That's what happens. So the first tranche of community leaders have been corrupted. And you've seen that before your very eyes. It doesn't mean to say that they all will be corrupted, but clearly the political class, the establishment, whatever word you want to use, don't have our best interests at heart. For all the reasons we've talked about, they don't really want to see Kashmir be independent. They never wanted East Timor become independent, and I could talk about that on another conference. They don't want it, and in candid moments admit that, but there we are. What could people do? Well, I think the future, actually, Mustafa will probably need to come on another conference for this. The Magnitsky Act that America, the UK and others are bringing into, I believe that is the way forward in a tiny way about the oppressors, how we can get justice. So in other words, individuals that have carried them out in the name of the state can be prosecuted and can be sanctioned and can be followed. So I'd suggest Muslim and other people, that's something we need to investigate more. And there is some universal jurisdiction still out there that can be used too. So what I'd like to do in the future with Nazar's support and everybody on here is to have a strategy meeting. Possibly we won't record it, a strategy meeting about how can we learn from the past and what can we do for the future to advance everybody's course. It starts from awareness of the public, because most of my neighbours don't know what we're talking about here. Secondly, is to move on, how have they achieved it in the past in East Timor, Kosovo, South Sudan and others, maybe a dozen of them, and how can we copy it? What do we have to do? What are the ingredients we have to do? And then we have to probably wait for the geopolitical moment. And then when that moment arrives, you have to strike, you have to exploit it. And if you're not ready to exploit it, it may pass you by. I think the Tamils had that position in the early 2000s. They missed an opportunity and they fell victim of the war on terror, which was totally independent of them. And then they got branded as terrorists and their whole cause, whether they were terrorists or not, dissipated and they became branded. So there's lessons to be learned, but we'll do that another time, another conference. I'm sure everybody here would like to be part of that conference, finding the solutions for the future. So unless anybody else has got something desperate to say, I'm going to bring this to a close, but I want to suggest a statement we could put out, but only with your agreement, and I'll read it to you, something I've scribbled out listening, something we should have for the Caste as well. The statement would be that this conference believes that the world should understand, or made to understand, that India is not a nation, but a union of separate and distinct nations that have never been able to freely choose their future. Until they are allowed to do so, India will remain an empire. Show of hands if you agree with that statement. I think we're going to count that as unanimous. Thank you, everybody.
Graham, can you just rather than empire?
Gurnham and Franz wants to say something. Gurnham.
An imperial empire, yeah?
Well, I think all empires are imperial.
Yeah, I guess some people might see that as benevolent, but...
okay, I don't, but thank you, Gurnham.
Like the British Empire or something.
Yes, all right. Franz, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to say something now, because it's nearly 1:30. And can
we have 1 minute each from the other two, then we're going to finish. Franz, please.
I'll be the last one. Go on. 1 minute each, please, not more than that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to unmute everybody. 1 minute each.
Can't hear Franz.
Franz, you need to unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, Franz, please, quickly.
Can you put that statement in the email so I can share it with others and spread it around?
Yeah, I'll do it to everybody. Thank you, Franz.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Mustafa, I think the last word before Nazar. Need to unmute yourself.
Yes. With regards to the statement, choice of terminology and direct reference to states is very counterproductive. Instead of saying India, Indian continent would be more diplomatic. Instead of saying empire, imperial-like is far more diplomatic. I suggest these terminologies from 45 years of scraping to get acceptance in international law circles. Therefore, I know it's best to go with the grain. Thank you very much for that last minute.
All right, everybody, 1 minute each. Go on. I'll be the last one. Who's next? Nobody? Anybody else saying anything? No?
Maybe, can we use the word fascist anywhere? Okay, doctor's saying no. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, can I come? We agreed on that resolution, and I think Graham will circulate it to you. If anybody want to make any change, you can suggest it before we publish it. I would like to say a few words. The last one. Thanks very much, all of you. The previous session and this one. When I look at Mujambar, he may not know that I had a chance to work with his father. And earlier on, we talked about we are hitting the wall. The candle, I think the word was used by Zishan, is father-lit, he is following it. I will only say one thing, as I think there's an agenda somewhere, it's a concluded remark by Nazar Lodi. Carry on, and carry on. Another word, don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. If you give up, there is nobody else to follow it. It's like a simple thing. There's a keep, if there are two candles, you let another candle with that. The candle you had in hand is not going to lose anything except it's passing the light. There's a light on, everybody have a light on end of the tunnel. Carry on. Thanks very much for coming. Special thanks to Graham, to all of them. Special thanks to Zishan, a professor, invite the very last minute notice, has spent all day with us. Bye-bye. I can't say you have a safe journey because you're all in your home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
From Saravana and Mazamli, Franz, and everybody else.
Thank you.
Take care. Till next time.
Thank you.